Calvin James didn't slam the folder down. He placed it, slowly, deliberately, right in the center of the boardroom table, in front of 12 executives, 6 investors, and 1 man who had spent the last 6 months pretending he didn't exist. 47 people. Calvin said, his voice low and completely steady, could have died because of what's in that folder. The room went dead silent. Diana Hartwell, sitting at the head of that table, looked at the man she had hired as a construction site supervisor. The quiet, single father. The one nobody had bothered to remember. And she felt something cold move through her chest. Not because of the folder. Not because of the scandal that was about to bury her company. But because 3 nights ago, standing beside the river with the city lights trembling on the water, Calvin had stepped back from her just slightly and whispered with a nervous laugh, "Careful. People would think we're together." And she had looked at him without laughing, without flinching. Would that be bad? He never answered her. But tonight, watching him stand alone against a room full of powerful men who wanted him gone, she realized she already knew. Drop a comment right now with your city. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button. Because what happens next, I promise you, you will not see it coming. The alarm didn't wake Calvin James. He was already up. He had been awake since 4:47 in the morning, sitting at the kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee and a stack of blueprint drawings spread out in front of him. His reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, a red pen moving slowly across the paper. He wasn't supposed to have these blueprints yet. He had asked for them 3 times through the hiring firm and been ignored 3 times. So he did what he always did when people ignored him. He found another way. A former colleague had emailed him a partial copy, just enough for Calvin to start reading. And what he found in the first 40 minutes of reading made him set down his coffee, lean back in his chair, and stare at the ceiling for a long moment. Then he picked up the red pen and started writing in the margin. At 6:15, he heard the small feet hitting the floor upstairs. He folded the blueprints, tucked the red pen behind his ear, and walked to the bottom of the stairs. "Zoe, you've got 12 minutes." A groan floated down from behind a closed door. "Daddy, it's too early." It was too early 45 minutes ago. Now it's just Tuesday. Another groan. Then the sound of water running. Calvin moved back to the kitchen and started making eggs. He knew exactly how Zoe wanted them scrambled, no pepper with a small square of toast, cut diagonally, because she had decided 2 years ago that triangles tasted better than rectangles, and he had never bothered arguing the point. When she appeared at the bottom of the stairs 8 minutes later, her hair was in a lopsided ponytail and her left shoe was untied. She carried her backpack over one shoulder, dragging it on the floor behind her. "You look like you survived something," Calvin said without turning around. "I had a dream," she said seriously, climbing onto the stool at the counter. "There was a horse, and it was wearing a hat. Sensible horse. And you were there. Was I wearing a hat? No, you were fixing something." Calvin turned and put the plate in front of her. "That tracks." She picked up her fork and looked at the eggs. "Daddy?" "Yeah." "Are you going to be home tonight?" He leaned against the counter and looked at her. "Why?" She shrugged with one shoulder, not looking up. "Melissa's dad wasn't home again. She said he's never home anymore." Calvin was quiet for a second. Then he said, "I'll be home by 6. Promise." "Promise." She looked up at him and smiled. And that smile, just that small, ordinary morning smile, did something to Calvin's chest that no paycheck or project completion certificate had ever done. He fixed her shoe before she left, stood on the front step, and watched her climb into the school bus. Stood there a few seconds after the bus turned the corner. Then he went back inside, picked up the blueprints, folded them inside his jacket, and walked to his truck. The Hartwell Development Group occupied the top 3 floors of a glass building downtown. Calvin had looked it up the night before, not because he was impressed, but because he liked knowing what he was walking into. The lobby was the kind of lobby designed to make people feel small. High ceilings, polished floors that reflected the lighting back at you, a reception desk staffed by a woman who looked at Calvin's faded work jacket with the kind of careful blankness that meant she had been trained not to react to anything. "Calvin James," he said. "I have an interview with the hiring office at 9. She looked at her screen, looked back at him. "Do you have your resume? Sent it 4 days ago. And your portfolio references and certifications, also sent." He met her eyes. "All I'm missing is someone pointing me in the right direction." She gave him a visitor badge and pointed him toward the elevators. The conference room where they put him was on the 31st floor. A glass-walled room with a view of the city and a rectangular table with 8 chairs, 7 of which were empty. The 8th held a man in his mid-40s with a firm handshake and a name tag that said Gerald Stanton, Executive Director of Operations. Gerald Stanton had the posture of a man who had decided very early in life that the world owed him a particular kind of deference. He looked at Calvin the way people look at a car they're not sure they want to buy. "Mr. James." He gestured to the chair across from him. "I'll be honest with you. Your resume is unusual." "Unusual how?" "You have a gap. Several years where you were essentially off the grid professionally." "I was raising my daughter." Stanton blinked. "Right. And before that you were at—" He glanced at the resume. "Smaller firms. Nothing in our portfolio range." "I understand." "Our last construction manager had 16 years with Fortune 500 developers." "And he resigned unexpectedly," Calvin said. "Which is why I'm sitting in this chair." Stanton looked at him. Calvin reached into his jacket and pulled out the folded blueprints. He unfolded them on the table and slid them across to Stanton. "I looked at the plans you sent to the hiring firm." Stanton frowned. "We didn't send plans. You sent an overview document. I got the actual plans through a separate contact." Calvin leaned forward and pointed to a section he had circled in red. "The load distribution on the East Pier Foundation is modeled for standard clay soil. The Geological Survey from 2019, which is publicly filed with the city, shows mixed substrate with high groundwater in that quadrant. These calculations are off." Stanton stared at the blueprints. "It's not catastrophic yet," Calvin said. "But if you start pouring on that section before someone recalculates the bearing capacity, you'll start seeing micro-fractures in the foundation within 18 months. Maybe sooner depending on seasonal groundwater movement." Silence. Stanton picked up the blueprints, studied them, set them back down. "Who told you about the groundwater report?" "Nobody told me. I looked for it." Calvin sat back. "It's a public document, Mr. Stanton. Anyone could have found it. Our engineers reviewed those plans." "Then they either didn't look at the Geological Survey, or they looked at it and didn't connect the numbers." Calvin paused. "Either one of those problems has a solution. But you need to know it's a problem first." Stanton was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood up and said, "Wait here." He was gone for 11 minutes. Calvin counted. When the door opened again, it wasn't Stanton who walked in. Diana Hartwell was 32 years old, and she walked like a woman who had learned very early that the room would not make space for her unless she took it. She wore a dark blazer, no jewelry except small gold earrings, and she carried nothing. No folder, no tablet, no notes. She sat down across from Calvin, looked at the blueprints on the table, and then looked directly at him. "Gerald says you found an error in the foundation plans. An inconsistency," Calvin said, "between the structural model and the actual soil composition data. In under 45 minutes, from a partial set of plans." "Yes." She studied him the way he imagined she studied everything, with complete attention and no visible reaction. "Why were you looking for errors? Most candidates bring portfolios. I brought mine too. But I figured you'd have read 100 portfolios this week." He met her eyes. "I thought it might be more useful to show you what kind of attention I pay." A pause. Something shifted in her expression. Not a smile, not quite. Something more careful than that. Where did you work before the gap in your resume? Structural engineering. Private firm, then university-affiliated research for a few years. Research in what area? Load dynamics in high-stress bridge construction, specifically in environments with unstable substrate. She looked at the blueprints, then back at him. And why did you leave? Calvin was quiet for exactly long enough that it was honest instead of evasive. Family circumstances, he said. It was time to be in a different place. And now I need to work, and you need someone who knows what they're doing. He nodded toward the blueprints. I found that in 45 minutes, Ms. Hartwell. Give me 3 weeks on that site, and I'll tell you every problem you don't know you have yet. The silence stretched between them. Then Diana said, Your contract starts Monday. The Riverside Waterfront Project was the largest development in the city in over a decade. A mixed-use complex built along a 2-mile stretch of reclaimed industrial waterfront, retail, residential, a public park, and at the center of it, a pedestrian bridge designed to become the signature image of the whole development. On the first Monday, Calvin showed up 30 minutes before anyone else. He walked the site alone in the early morning quiet, reading the ground the way other men read newspapers. He knelt down at the East Foundation area, pressed his palm flat against the surface, stood up and made notes in his spiral notebook. By the time the crew arrived, he had already identified 3 more concerns he wanted to look at. Derek Washington, the lead foreman, was a heavy-set man in his early 50s, with forearms like bridge cables, and the deeply skeptical expression of someone who had watched too many supervisors come and go. You the new guy, Derek said, looking Calvin up and down. Calvin James. Derek. They shook hands. Derek didn't let go immediately. It was the kind of handshake that was also an interview. Corporate sent you down here to babysit us. I'm here to get the bridge built. We were building it fine before. I know. Calvin held his gaze. I'm not here to tell you how to do your job. I'm here to make sure nobody above you is making decisions that put your crew in a bad position. Derek held the handshake another beat. Then he let go. You ever worked a site like this? I've worked worse. You got a company jacket? No. Derek looked at the faded work jacket Calvin was wearing. That thing waterproof. Hasn't failed me yet. Derek made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, but was in that direction. He turned and pointed at a group of men gathering near the equipment shed. Come on, I'll introduce you to the crew. The crew was 23 men. Some of them had been working the waterfront site since the first shovel hit the ground. Some had been hired in the last month to cover for lost time. All of them were watching Calvin the same way Derek had, with the patient measuring look of people who had learned to wait and see. Calvin didn't give a speech. He walked down the line and shook every hand. He asked 3 questions to each man. How long have you been on the site? What's been the biggest headache this week? And is there anything you've wanted to flag but didn't know who to tell? That third question changed the temperature of the morning. A young man named Trevor, maybe 23 years old, raised his hand like he was in school. What is it? Calvin said. The drainage on the north side, Trevor said, looking like he expected to be dismissed. It's backing up every time it rains more than 2 inches. I said something to the last manager, and he told me it wasn't my department. Is it backing up toward the foundation footings? Trevor blinked. Yeah, it is. Show me. And Calvin walked with Trevor to the north side of the site, while the rest of the crew watched, and he knelt down in the mud, and he looked at the drainage pattern, and he said, Good catch. Just those 2 words. But Trevor stood up straighter for the rest of the day. Derek watched all of this from 20 yards away. He didn't say anything. But that evening, when Calvin was the last one on the site, still walking, still writing in his notebook, Derek came back. You don't have to stay, Derek said. I know. We've had supervisors who clocked out at 4 o'clock. Site ran fine. I'm sure it did. Calvin looked up from his notebook. I'm not staying because I don't trust your crew. I'm staying because I want to understand the site before I start giving instructions on it. Derek was quiet. Then, Trevor's a good kid. He's got a good eye. Nobody ever told him that before. Calvin looked at him. I know. Derek nodded slowly. All right, he said. See you tomorrow. Then, Diana came to the site on the third day. She didn't announce it. She arrived in a town car, got out, and walked to the trailer that served as the on-site office. Her assistant, a quick, organized woman named Sandra, was with her holding a tablet and walking half a step behind. Where's James? Diana asked. Sandra checked her tablet. According to the sign-in log, he's been on site since 6:15. It's 8:40. Yes, ma'am. Diana found him at the East Foundation with a level tool and a junior engineer named Paul, who looked like he'd recently graduated from somewhere expensive. Calvin was showing Paul something in his notebook, pointing between the notebook and the ground. It's not about what the model says, Calvin was telling Paul when Diana walked up. It's about what the ground is actually doing. The model is a starting point. You've got to check it against what's in front of you every time. Paul nodded rapidly, writing notes of his own. Calvin heard Diana approach and looked up. He straightened, tucked the notebook under his arm. Ms. Hartwell. Mr. James. She looked at the ground where they were working. Any news? I've got a few things I need to bring to your attention, but I want to confirm them first before I put them on paper. He paused. Can you give me until end of week? I'll have a full report. The investors want a progress update Friday. I'll have something ready for you by Thursday morning. She studied him. You've been here since 6. Site's quieter in the early hours, easier to listen. Listen to what? He looked at her for a moment. The site. Ground settles differently in the morning cold. Equipment vibration patterns change. You can hear things early that get covered up by the noise of the workday. He paused. It probably sounds strange. It doesn't, she said, and she meant it. I'll expect the report Thursday. She turned to leave, stopped, turned back. The crew, how are they? Good people, Calvin said. They've been working without much direction for a while. They're ready to do good work. They just needed someone to actually listen to them. Something moved across Diana's face. A quick, careful thing that came and went. Thursday, she said. Thursday, he confirmed. The Thursday report ran 14 pages. Diana read it in her office with the door closed, and Sandra under strict instructions to hold everything. She read it once quickly, and then went back to the beginning and read it again slowly. Then she called Gerald Stanton. Have you read James's report? She said when he picked up. I looked at it. What did you think? A pause. It's thorough. It identified 6 structural concerns the original engineering team missed. They didn't miss them. They assessed them as within acceptable parameters. Gerald. Diana kept her voice even. He found drainage issues that, if left unaddressed, will compromise the North Foundation over the next 2 to 3 rainy seasons. That is not within acceptable parameters. He's a site supervisor. He's not a licensed structural. He has a master's degree in civil engineering and 12 years of field experience. She flipped to the back of the report. Which I know because I looked it up after reading this. Stanton went quiet. Fix the drainage issue, Diana said. And get me the names of whoever signed off on the original foundation specs. Diana. Thursday afternoon, Gerald. I want those names. She hung up. She sat at her desk for a long moment, looking at the report. Then she picked up her phone again and called down to the site trailer. Calvin picked up on the second ring. James? It's Diana Hartwell, your report. The drainage solution you proposed on page 9. Yes. What's the timeline on implementation? If we start Monday, I can have it corrected without losing more than 3 days on the main schedule. And the bearing capacity recalculations on the East Pier. That'll take longer. I've been in contact with a geotechnical consultant I've worked with before. She can have updated numbers to us in 10 days. Diana paused. You've already contacted a consultant. I didn't commission anything yet. I didn't want to spend company funds without approval. A brief pause. But I wanted to know if the resource was available before I brought it to you, so I reached out to ask. Diana looked at the ceiling. Send me her information. Already in the report. Page 12, footnote. She flipped to page 12. There it was. Mr. James, she said. Yes, Ms. Hartwell. She almost said something else. Instead, good work. A beat of silence. Thank you. By the end of the second week, the site felt different. People noticed it even if they couldn't name what had changed. The crew came to work on time. Arguments that used to flare up between shifts were handled quietly before they became problems. Trevor had been given responsibility for monitoring the drainage correction, and he walked the site every morning with a clipboard and a new kind of confidence. Derek pulled Calvin aside one Tuesday afternoon. What did you do to that kid? Derek said, nodding toward Trevor. I didn't do anything to him. He's showing up 40 minutes early. Good. He told his mother he thinks he wants to go back to school for engineering. Calvin smiled. It was a slow, private kind of smile. Even better. Derek crossed his arms and looked at Calvin sideways. You were a teacher before. No. You got a way of explaining things. Like a teacher. I just remember being 23 and having nobody tell me when I did something right. Calvin looked back toward the site. It costs nothing to tell someone they did good work. Derek was quiet for a moment. Then, where'd you work before here? Different places. Before the gap on your resume. Calvin looked at him. Heard about that? Word gets around. I was in structural research for a while, then I wasn't. What happened? A long pause. Calvin watched a crane swing a load across the site. The operator was good smooth movements, no wasted motion. My wife got sick, he said finally. Then she wasn't sick anymore. She was gone. He said it simply without drama, like a fact he had made peace with a long time ago, even if the peace was the hard kind. Zoe was 3. I needed to be somewhere I could be home by 6. Derek said nothing. He just nodded once slow. I don't tell people that because I want sympathy, Calvin said. I tell you because you asked and you've been straight with me, so I'll be straight with you. Appreciated, Derek said quietly. How about you? Calvin said, looking at him. You got family. Wife? 2 boys, 19 and 23. Derek's chest seemed to expand slightly when he said it. 19 wants to play ball. 23 wants to do nothing. I'm working on both of them. Calvin laughed. It was a real laugh, unexpected, and it changed his whole face. Good luck with the 23-year-old? Yeah, Derek said, but he was smiling now. Yeah. Diana started coming to the site more often. She told Sandra it was because of the investor updates. She told herself it was because the project was at a critical phase. She told Gerald it was standard oversight given the recent staffing changes. None of those things were entirely false, but none of them were the whole truth either. On the 4th visit, she arrived at the site and found Calvin in the middle of an argument. The argument was with a man named Boone, a senior equipment operator who had been on the site longer than almost anyone and had decided apparently that the new drainage correction was slowing his timeline, and he was going to express this opinion at significant volume. 6 years I've been running equipment on waterfront sites, and I have never had a supervisor tell me to wait on a pour because of some theoretical groundwater math. It's not theoretical, Calvin said. He was standing directly in front of Boone, not backing up an inch, his voice completely calm. It's in the geotechnical report. The substrate in this quadrant holds water differently than the east side. If you pour today, you're going to see cracking in the footing within 2 years. You don't know that. I do know that. I've seen it happen. He held Boone's gaze. I've also seen what happens when a foundation fails during full occupancy, Boone. I've seen the investigation. I've seen the lawsuits. I've seen the names in the report. A pause. That won't happen on my site. Boone was bigger than Calvin. He was louder than Calvin. He had more years in the industry than Calvin. But something about the way Calvin said my sight quiet certain unbothered made Boone stop. The crew watched. Boone looked at Calvin for a long moment. Then he took a breath and turned away muttering something and walked toward the equipment shed. The crew went back to work. Calvin turned and found Diana standing 10 feet behind him. He looked at her. "How long have you been there?" "Long enough." She glanced toward the equipment shed. "He's been with the company for 6 years. "I know. You're not worried he'll push back up the chain?" "He might." Calvin shrugged. "But he knew I was right. That's why he walked away instead of pushing harder." He picked up his notebook. "If he goes over my head, I'll stand behind the geotechnical report." Diana looked at him. "You're not worried I'll overrule you?" "No." A brief pause. "Why not?" He met her eyes. "Because you read that report, all 14 pages of it." He paused. "You called me about footnote 12. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked away toward the waterfront. The bridge structure was beginning to take shape, rising from both sides of the river. "It's going to be something," she said quietly. Calvin looked at the bridge frame. "Yeah," he said. "It is." They stood there for a moment, not talking, not filling the silence with anything, just looking at the structure that was slowly, patiently becoming what it had always been designed to be. Then Diana's phone rang and the moment ended. But it left a mark. The kind of mark that you don't notice right away. The kind that shows up later when you're not looking for it. The calls from Zoe started becoming part of the rhythm of the workday. They always came at noon or within 10 minutes of noon because Zoe had lunch at school from 12 to 12:30 and she considered this to be reasonable phone time. Calvin always answered. The crew figured it out by the end of the first week. On the second Friday when Calvin's phone rang at 12:03 and he stepped away from the group with the small particular transformation that happened on his face when he talked to his daughter Derek, leaned over to Trevor and said, "Clocker, exactly 18 minutes. It was 19. "Close," Trevor said. The conversations were always the same pattern. Zoe telling him something that had happened at school with complete narrative commitment. Calvin asking questions with complete attention. Zoe going off on a tangent. Calvin gently herding her back the exchange. Ending with, "I love you, Daddy. Love you more." That's not possible, because the amount I love you is infinite. Mine is infinite plus 1. That's not a real number. It is in my math. A pause. "Okay, but I still win. You always win, baby." "Bye, Daddy." "Goodbye, Zoe." Diana heard this conversation on a Tuesday afternoon. She had come to the site without calling ahead. She did that more often. Now she noticed, and she was walking toward the trailer when she heard Calvin's voice around the corner of the equipment shed. She stopped without meaning to. She didn't stay long enough to be eavesdropping. Just long enough to hear the end of it. Just long enough to hear the way his voice changed the whole texture of it when he was talking to his daughter. She walked back to the trailer and stood for a moment with her hand on the door handle. She thought about her father, about the way he used to call her on her lunch break when she was in business school, how she sometimes didn't answer because she was busy, how she wished now with a specific and permanent pain that she had always answered. She thought about what it meant that a man who had been through whatever Calvin had been through could still answer the phone that way, could still turn into that version of himself every single day. She pushed open the trailer door and went to work. But that evening, leaving the site, she asked Sandra, "Do you know anything about his background, James? Before the gap in his resume?" Sandra looked at her tablet. "Not much. University-affiliated research. He published some papers. I found a few citations in structural engineering journals." Engineering journals. His work on load dynamics in bridge construction was referenced in at least 2 graduate programs. Diana stopped walking. Referenced how? As primary source material. Sandra looked up from the tablet. His methodology apparently became part of the standard curriculum at one of the universities, for a few years. Diana stood still for a moment. He listed himself as a project supervisor on his application, she said. Yes. She started walking again. Get me everything you can find. On a Thursday evening in the 4th week, the last of the crew had left, and Calvin was closing up the site trailer when the door opened. It was Diana. She had a folder under her arm, and she looked like she had come straight from a meeting heels blazer, the slight tension around her eyes that meant she had been in difficult conversations for most of the day. I thought everyone was gone, Calvin said. I told Sandra to leave. She put the folder on the desk between them. I found some of your old work. He looked at the folder, didn't open it. Okay. You published a paper in 2011, Load Distribution Analysis and High Groundwater Bridge Foundations. She watched him. It's still being cited. I know. You didn't mention it. You didn't ask about publications. You asked about project experience. He met her eyes. I have plenty of project experience. The gap, she said. The years you were out, was it entirely because of your daughter? He was quiet for a moment. Not evasive, just measuring what he was going to say and how much of it was hers to know. Partly, he said finally. After my wife died, I needed to be present for Zoe. That was real. He paused. But there was also a situation at the end of my time in research, involving a project I flagged some concerns on. The firm I was with chose not to act on my recommendations. What happened? The project was completed. The foundation performed within compliance for 3 years. He paused. Then there was settlement. Significant settlement. No one was hurt. But it was expensive, and it was covered up, and the firm... He stopped. The people responsible found it easier to question my original recommendations than to take responsibility for their decisions. Diana stared at him. They blamed you. They questioned my judgment publicly, enough that it cost me professionally. He said it with the same flatness he used for everything, not bitterly, not dramatically, like a thing that had happened and been accounted for. I was tired of fighting. I had a 3-year-old, and I was out of energy for the fight, so I walked away. Calvin. She said his first name without planning to. It just came out. That wasn't right. No, it wasn't. He looked at her. But some things you can't fix by fighting. Some things you have to survive and rebuild somewhere else. She looked at him for a long moment. The folder sat on the desk between them, unopened. Why are you here? She asked. On this site, with this project. If you could be... Because this is the work, he said simply. This is the actual work. The bridge. The foundation. The thing that people are going to walk across. He looked out the small window of the trailer toward the river. I don't need my name on a journal article. I need to know it was built right. Diana was quiet. She had spent 10 years trying to prove she was worth her last name, trying to justify her position, her authority, her presence at the top of a company her father had built. She had walked into every room ready to defend herself before anyone attacked. And here was this man, this quiet, unassuming, brilliant man in a faded work jacket who had walked away from recognition because he cared more about whether the bridge was standing than whether anyone remembered who designed it. She picked up the folder. I'll need you at the investor briefing tomorrow, she said. Her voice was steady. They're going to ask about the timeline adjustments. I'll be there. She turned to leave. Diana. She stopped. It was the first time he had used her name. She turned. The drainage correction is holding, he said. I checked it this morning after the rain. It's working. She looked at him. I know. I saw your email. I know you saw it. A pause. A small thing happened on his face. A slight uncertainty that she had not seen there before. I wanted to tell you in person, because it matters. She held his gaze for a moment. It does, she said. It really does. And she walked out into the evening, and the bridge stood framed against the darkening sky over the river, and Calvin James stood in the door of the trailer and watched her go. He didn't know yet what was coming, He didn't know about the documents Gerald Stanton had signed, about the materials that had been approved and substituted, and the inspection records that had been changed. He didn't know that the fight he had walked away from years ago was about to find him again. He only knew that for the first time in a very long time, he was standing somewhere that felt important, not because of what it could do for him, but because of what it could become. That feeling scared him more than anything else. Part 2. What the River Knows. The investor briefing was on the 32nd floor in a room with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view that was clearly designed to make people feel like they were above ordinary problems. 12 investors sat around an oval table. Some of them had been waiting for this meeting for weeks. Some of them, Calvin could tell from the first 30 seconds, had already made up their minds that the news was going to be bad. He stood at the front of the room in his cleanest work clothes, dark pants, a gray button-down shirt he had ironed that morning at 5:30 while Zoe was still asleep, and he put his report on the table, and he looked at the room. Diana sat to his left. Gerald Stanton sat across from her, and the expression on his face was the particular expression of a man who is very carefully not showing what he is feeling. "Thank you all for your patience," Calvin began. "I know the timeline adjustments have created concern. I want to walk you through exactly what we found, why it matters, and what we're doing about it." A man at the far end of the table, silver-haired, expensive watch, the particular impatience of someone accustomed to having his phone calls returned within the hour, leaned forward. "Mr. James, we're already 11 days behind. The drainage correction, the geotechnical recalculations, these were not in the original project plan." "No, sir, they weren't." "Then why are we only finding these issues now? This project has been in development for 2 years. Calvin nodded slowly. "That's a fair question. The honest answer is that these issues existed in the original engineering assessments. They were identified and categorized as within acceptable parameters." He paused. "They are not within acceptable parameters. The original assessments used a soil composition model that didn't match the actual geological survey data on file with the city." Silence. "Are you telling us," the silver-haired man said, "that the engineering team made an error?" "I'm telling you, the engineering team used a model that didn't fully account for the site-specific data that was available to them." He kept his voice even. No accusation, just facts. "Whether that was an oversight or a decision, I can't tell you. What I can tell you is that if we had poured on the original spec, we would have been looking at foundation remediation costs in 3 to 4 years that would have significantly exceeded the cost of the corrections we're making now." The room was quiet. Calvin opened his report and turned to the 3rd page. "What I can tell you is where we are today. The drainage correction on the north section is complete. The geotechnical survey for the East Pier has been updated. We are 11 days behind on paper. With the adjusted workflow I've put in place, we will recover 7 of those days before the end of next month. The net delay to completion is 4 days." He looked up. 4 days is recoverable. A failed foundation is not. The silver-haired man leaned back. He looked at Diana. Diana was watching Calvin. She had been watching him since he stood up. Now she turned to the room and said, "The integrity of this structure is non-negotiable. Mr. James has our full support to do this correctly." Another investor, younger, sharper, the kind of person who asked the question everyone else was afraid to ask, said, "Who signed off on the original engineering specs?" Stanton shifted in his seat. "We're looking into that," Diana said. "Who's looking into it?" "I am," she said. Flat. No invitation for follow-up. The younger investor looked at Calvin. "You found all of this in your first week on the site?" "Most of it, yes." "And you've been in the industry how long?" 15 years. "Where were you before this?" Calvin looked at him steadily. "Raising my daughter." A brief pause. A few people around the table exchanged glances. The younger investor nodded slowly as if recalibrating something. The meeting ended 40 minutes later. Most of the investors left satisfied, not happy, but satisfied, which was the best possible outcome. The silver-haired man stopped at the door and looked back at Calvin. He didn't say anything. He just nodded once. Calvin nodded back. When the room had emptied out, Diana stayed behind. Stanton tried to stay too, but she said, "Gerald, I'll get with you this afternoon." And something in her voice left no room for negotiation. Stanton looked at Calvin on his way out. The look lasted less than a second. Calvin catalogued it the way he catalogued everything quietly and without reacting. When the door closed, Diana sat back down. She put both hands flat on the table and looked at the window. 4 days, she said. I'll get it to 3, Calvin said. That's not what I was thinking about. He sat down across from her. What were you thinking about? She was quiet for a moment. Gerald signed off on the original engineering specs, she said. He was the one who approved the assessment team's methodology. Calvin said nothing. He had suspected something like this since the first week. He had not said it out loud because he didn't say things out loud until he was certain. Did you know that before today? She asked. I suspected. Why didn't you say something? Because suspecting and knowing aren't the same thing. He met her eyes. And because if I walked in here with an accusation on my second week before I had enough to back it up, what happens then? Gerald's been with this company for 9 years. I'm a project supervisor nobody'd heard of 6 weeks ago. Diana looked at him. She knew he was right. She had been in enough boardrooms to know exactly how that would have played out. What do you have? She asked. Not enough yet. He paused. But I'm getting there. She stared at the window. My father trusted him. Calvin said nothing. There were things you couldn't fix with logic, and the grief underneath that sentence was one of them. He was my father's first senior hire, she said. When Dad got sick and I took over, Gerald was the one who stayed, who didn't walk out. She paused. I gave him more access than I should have because of that. That's not a character flaw, Calvin said quietly. That's loyalty. It just got pointed in the wrong direction. She looked at him. Something in her expression shifted, opened just slightly like a window that had been painted shut for too long, and someone had finally worked the latch. Don't be kind to me right now, she said. I'm trying to be angry. You can be both. She almost smiled. She stopped it before it fully formed. I need you to keep looking, she said. Whatever you're finding, keep going, but carefully. I know how to be careful. Gerald has allies on the board. If he finds out you're looking at his records, he'll move to undermine your credibility before you can make a case. I know. Then you know to watch your back. Calvin picked up his report from the table and stood. Ms. Hartwell, I've been watching my back since I was 28 years old. He said it without bitterness, just the simple fact of it. I'm still here. He left her sitting alone in the room, with the city spread out beneath her, and the weight of everything she was beginning to understand settling across her shoulders like a thing she had always known was coming. On the site, the days developed their own rhythm. And rhythm Calvin had learned over 15 years of construction work was the difference between a project that succeeded and a project that fell apart. Rhythm meant Derek Washington arrived at 6:45 every morning and did a walkthrough before anyone else moved. Rhythm meant Trevor checked the drainage monitoring points at 8 and reported to Calvin by 8:15. Rhythm meant the crane operator, a quiet veteran named Sam, knew exactly when Calvin was going to call for a lift and had it ready. Calvin spent his days moving. He was never in one place long enough for the site to get comfortable ignoring him, and never hovering long enough to make anyone nervous. He had spent years learning how to be present without being oppressive, and the crew responded to it the way they responded to good weather. They didn't talk about it much, but they worked better because of it. It was on a Wednesday afternoon in the 6th week that he found the first document. He had been going through the supplier invoices, a task nobody had asked him to do, but which he had taken on because construction project billing was its own kind of geological survey, and patterns in the numbers told stories that the ground couldn't. He found it in a file labeled Routine Maintenance Expenditure, 3rd Quarter, a line item for materials, specifically for the rebar used in the primary bridge support columns. The amount was correct. The supplier name was correct, but the grade specification listed was wrong. Not wrong by much, The kind of wrong that would sail past a casual review, but wrong. He pulled the materials delivery log. He pulled the inspection sign-off records for that section of construction. He sat in the site trailer with the door closed and the evening coming down outside, and he went through every piece of paper very slowly. The rebar that had been ordered was grade 60. Industry standard for the load requirements of this bridge. The rebar that had been delivered based on the delivery log from the supplier was also grade 60. But the inspection record for the acceptance of that delivery had a notation that had been initialed over and underneath the initiation, half visible because the ink had bled through, were different numbers. Grade 40. Calvin sat very still for a long moment. Grade 40, rebar in a load-bearing structure designed for grade 60, was not a minor variance. Under normal conditions, it would hold. Under stress earthquake extreme weather event, the accumulated load of heavy pedestrian traffic over years, it was a different conversation entirely. He took photographs of every document. He made copies. He put the originals back exactly where he had found them. Then he closed the trailer, walked to his truck, and sat in the driver's seat for 5 minutes before calling Diana. She picked up on the third ring. He could hear that she was still in the office. The particular kind of quiet that meant she was alone. "James, I need to meet with you tomorrow morning," he said. "Not on site, somewhere private." A pause. She heard something in his voice. "What did you find?" "Not over the phone." Another pause. 7 o'clock. "There's a coffee place 2 blocks south of the building. Morrow's. I'll be there." "I'll be there at 6:50, he said. He drove home. He made dinner. He helped Zoe with a school project about bridges, the irony of which was not lost on him, and he listened to her explain the different kinds of bridges with the specific enthusiasm of a child who had decided recently that engineering was interesting because her father did something like it. "Did you know a suspension bridge can be longer than a mile?" she said, pointing at a picture in her book. "I did know that." "How does it not fall down?" "Tension," he said. "The cables pull against each other. The more weight you put on, the more the tension balances it." She thought about this. Like when 2 people are pulling a rope in opposite directions and it goes tight in the middle. Exactly like that. So the bridge holds up because of the pulling. The bridge holds up because of the balance. She looked at the picture, then at him. "That's kind of like people, isn't it? Like how people hold each other up." Calvin looked at his daughter and felt something move through his chest, that specific, overwhelming pride that had nothing to do with accomplishment and everything to do with who she was becoming. "You're too smart for 8 years old," he said. "I'm almost 9. Even worse." She grinned. He put her to bed an hour later, and then he sat at the kitchen table with his copies of the documents and his notebook, and he mapped out every connection he could see. By midnight, the picture was beginning to take shape. And it was worse than he had thought. Diana was already at the coffee shop when he arrived at 6:48. She had a coffee in front of her and nothing else on the table. She was wearing a different kind of clothes than he had seen at the office, still put together, but quieter. Less armor, he thought. He sat down across from her without preamble and put the copies on the table. She looked at them. She looked at the rebar specification discrepancy. She looked at the initialed over notation. She looked at it for a long time without saying anything, and he watched her face move through several expressions very quickly before settling into something controlled and quiet. "When was this delivered?" she said. 7 months ago, before the project came off the rails, before your previous manager left. Gerald approved this delivery. Gerald's initials are on the acceptance record." He pointed to the document. "The initials that are on top covering the original numbers." She looked up at him. "You think he changed the acceptance record after the fact?" "I think someone did. The ink bleed through on the original notation is from a different pen. Different chemical composition, you can see it in the photograph, the color's slightly different." He slid the photograph across to her. The original numbers were recorded at delivery time. The initialing over them came later. Diana looked at the photograph. Her hand was flat on the table and very still. "If grade 40 rebar is in those columns, the bridge will function," Calvin said. "For a while, Under normal conditions, probably for years without visible problems. But it's not what was designed. It's not what was paid for. And in a stress scenario, it underperforms by a significant margin. He met her eyes. It's the kind of variance that shows up in an investigation after something happens. The coffee shop was filling up with the morning crowd. Regular people buying regular coffee, talking about regular things. Nobody looked at the two of them. Nobody knew. "Who else knows about this?" Diana said. "Nobody. Not Derek. No one." She was quiet. "What do you need?" "I need access to the full materials procurement records for the last 14 months. Not just the summary, the underlying transaction files." He paused. "And I need to know if there are other projects in the company's portfolio that use the same procurement approval chain." She stared at him. "You think this isn't isolated to the waterfront project?" "I think the way this was done is too practiced to be the first time." He held her gaze. "I hope I'm wrong." She sat back. She picked up her coffee and held it without drinking it and looked at the table. "My father built this company," she said. "He built it on, he used to say that a building is only as good as its foundation, that the work you don't see is the work that matters most." She stopped. "He said that to me when I was 10 years old, standing on a construction site wearing a hard hat that was too big for my head." A beat. He meant it as a metaphor about integrity. Calvin watched her. He didn't say anything. Sometimes the most important thing you could do for someone was give them room to find the words. "He trusted Gerald with this company," she said. "He called him a cornerstone." She set the coffee down. "If Gerald has been doing this since before my father got sick..." She stopped again. "Diana." He said her name the way he had that first time, not planned, just true. "Whatever your father knew or didn't know, whatever happened before you took over, none of that is on you." "I should have seen it." "You weren't looking for it. There was no reason to look." "There's always a reason to look." "Maybe." He leaned forward slightly. "But you're looking now, and you brought in someone who knew what to look for." He held her gaze. "What do you want to do?" She met his eyes across the table. In the morning light, she looked younger than she did in her office, and also older, and he understood suddenly that those two things could both be true about a person at the same time. "I want to get the procurement records," she said, quietly, "and I want to know the full scope before we do anything that tips Gerald off." "That's the right call." "Can you do that without going through his office?" "I can go through this project management system directly. Supervisor access includes materials records." He had already checked. "It won't trigger any notifications to his level." She nodded. "Do it." He started to stand. She said, "Calvin." He stopped. "Be careful," she said. And then, as if she had surprised herself, "I don't just mean professionally." He looked at her for a moment. "I know," he said. "I will." The records took him 4 evenings to go through, working in the site trailer after everyone else had left with a second laptop he had brought from home, so the access didn't log through the company system under his name. It wasn't deception, he had legitimate access to every file he opened. He was just being careful about the trail he left. What he found was worse than grade 40 rebar. There were 3 other projects in the Hartwell development portfolio, all completed within the last 6 years, where the materials procurement records showed the same pattern. Correct specifications on the order. Correct supplier names on the billing. But delivery records with subtle alterations, inspection sign-offs, with initialing patterns that matched the waterfront project exactly. And in 2 of the 3 cases, supplier secondary invoices that suggested a billing differential had been paid to a separate account. Someone had been ordering grade 60 materials, billing the company for grade 60 materials, substituting grade 40 materials on delivery, and pocketing the price difference. Over 6 years across 4 projects, the differential was substantial. Calvin ran the numbers twice to make sure he had them right. He sat back and looked at the ceiling of the trailer and thought about the people who lived and worked in those buildings. The ones that had already been completed. The one standing right now. Then he called Diana. She answered immediately, even though it was past 10 o'clock. "Tell me," he told her. She was silent for a long time. "How many buildings?" she said finally. "3 completed projects plus this one." "People are in those buildings?" "Yes." "Right now, tonight?" "Yes." She breathed. He heard it. "How serious is the structural risk? I can't fully assess it without on-site inspection of each property. The rebar variance doesn't guarantee failure. It significantly elevates risk in high-stress scenarios." He paused. "The honest answer is, I don't know exactly how serious it is until I can look." "We need to look." "I know. Without tipping Gerald off." "I know that too." He thought for a moment. "I have a contact, independent structural inspector. I've worked with her before. She's thorough, she's discreet, and she owes me a favor I've been holding for 3 years. He paused. "I can bring her in as a routine quality review. Clients do it all the time on completed properties. It won't look unusual." "Do it," Diana said. "Use whatever resources you need. Bill it directly to my personal account, not the company." "That's going to cost you?" "I know what it's going to cost me." She said it quietly and without hesitation. He heard something in her voice, a steadiness. Not the controlled professional steadiness she wore in meetings, but something underneath it, something genuine. The kind of steady that came from having made a decision and standing behind it completely. "Okay," he said. "Calvin?" "Yeah." A pause. "Is Zoe asleep?" He blinked. He hadn't expected the question. "Yeah. She went down at 8:30. "Good." She said it like she meant it. Like the fact that his daughter was safely asleep on this particular difficult night was something that actually mattered to her. "Get some rest. We'll talk tomorrow." He sat in the trailer for a few minutes after hanging up. The site was quiet around him. The river moved beyond the fencing, and he could hear it, if he was still enough. A low, persistent sound, the water going wherever it was going, patient and continuous. He thought about what Zoe had said about bridges, about how they held up because of the balance, about tension working in both directions. He thought about what Diana had said about her father, about foundations and integrity and the work you couldn't see. He had spent years being careful about people. He had learned to value the distance, the controlled professional surface, the arrangement where he could do good work and go home and be the person Zoe needed him to be without the complications of anything more. But sitting in that trailer in the dark, he was aware of something shifting. Something he had kept in one place for a long time moving. He picked up his phone and looked at it for a moment. Then he turned off the lights and locked the trailer and went to his truck. The weekend came. On Saturday morning, Calvin took Zoe to the park near their house, and she ran straight to the climbing structure and started working her way to the top with the focused determination she brought to everything that involved physical challenge. He sat on a bench and watched her. He had a coffee in one hand and his notebook in the other, but he wasn't writing anything. He was just watching her. "She's fearless," said a voice beside him. He turned. Diana Hartwell was standing 3 feet away, dressed in regular clothes, jeans, a dark jacket with a coffee of her own, and an expression he hadn't seen on her before. Something lighter. Something that wasn't carrying any weight. He stared at her. "What are you doing here?" "Honestly, I have no idea." She gestured at the bench. "Can I sit down?" He moved over. She sat. "I live 4 blocks from here," she said. "I used to come to this park when I was little. My father used to bring me on Saturday mornings." She looked at the playground. "I haven't been here in about 8 years." "What made you come today?" She thought about it. "I couldn't be in the office, and I couldn't be in my apartment." She paused. "And I needed to be somewhere that wasn't about any of it. Just for a few hours." He understood that. He understood it completely. Zoe came running from the climbing structure toward the bench. She stopped short when she saw Diana looked at her with the frank evaluating gaze of a child who had not yet learned to pretend that she wasn't examining someone. "Hi," Zoe said. "Hi," Diana said. "Are you my dad's friend?" "I'm his." Diana paused. She glanced at Calvin. "We work together." "Do you work on the bridge?" "In a way. Your dad does most of the real work." Zoe looked at Calvin with a satisfied expression, like this confirmed something she had already known. "He's really good at fixing things," she informed Diana. "He fixed my bike and my music box and the step on our porch that was creaky." "That sounds like your dad," Diana said. "He fixed Mrs. Patterson's fence too. She's our neighbor. He didn't even ask her to pay him." "Zoe," Calvin said. "It's true, though." She turned back to Diana. "What's your name?" "Diana." Zoe considered this. "That's pretty." She said it with complete sincerity, as if reporting a fact. "I'm going back on the climbing thing now." And she ran back. Calvin watched her go. "Sorry about that." "Don't be," Diana said. She was watching Zoe with an expression Calvin couldn't quite read. "She's wonderful. She has opinions about everything." "Where does she get that from?" He looked at her. She was smiling a real smile, unguarded with nothing professional about it. "She looks like her mother," he said after a moment. "But she argues like me." Diana laughed. It was a short, surprised laugh. The kind that comes before you can decide whether to let it. "I can't argue. Is that a good or a bad thing?" "Depends on who she's arguing with." They sat for a while without talking. On the bench in the Saturday morning park, with Zoe working her way across the monkey bars with fierce concentration, and the city moving around them at the unhurried pace that cities only managed on weekend mornings. "Can I ask you something?" Diana said. "Sure." "When you were doing the research, the papers you published, did you enjoy it?" "That kind of work." He thought about it. "I liked the problem solving. I liked finding the right answer to something that didn't have an obvious right answer." He paused. "But I always liked the site more, the actual physical thing, the work of building." "Why?" He watched Zoe hang from the monkey bars, swinging with total commitment. "Because on a site, when you're done, there's something there, something you can look at, something that has to hold weight in the real world." He paused. "Research is important. But you can write a paper that's technically correct and have it matter to nobody. You can't pour a foundation that's technically correct and have it matter to nobody." Diana was quiet. "My father used to say that every building tells you something about the person who built it. Not the architect. The person who was actually there making decisions when things didn't go the way the drawings said they would." He was right. He usually was. A pause. "He would have liked you." Calvin looked at her. She was still watching Zoe on the monkey bars, and her profile was turned away from him, and he thought, this woman is carrying so much. She carries it the way he had learned to carry things, with enough control that it looks like weightlessness from the outside until you know what you're looking at. "What was he like?" Calvin asked. She glanced at him, a little surprised by the question. "Tall," she said, then patient. "He had this way of listening where you felt like whatever you were saying was the most important thing happening in the world at that moment." She paused. "He was also stubborn as a wall when he thought he was right." "Sounds familiar?" She looked at him. Something in her expression changed. "Yeah," she said softly. "It does." Zoe came running back, slightly breathless. "Daddy, can we get lunch after this? Can we go to the taco place? Maybe. Please?" "How many times did you ask me to say yes before I actually say it?" She sighed with theatrical patience. 5 times usually. So that was number 1. She turned to Diana with the straightforward pragmatism of a child who understood leverage. "Do you like tacos?" Diana blinked. "I do." Zoe looked at her father with enormous eyes. Calvin looked back at his daughter and understood exactly what she was doing and could not entirely bring himself to shut it down. "You want to come to lunch," he said to Diana. He said it the way you say something when you're not sure if you should be saying it, but you're saying it anyway, Because something in you has decided. Diana looked at him. She stopped. Started again. I don't want to intrude on... Zoe invited you, Calvin said. She doesn't invite people she doesn't like. Zoe nodded solemnly to confirm this. I didn't invite Tyler from my class, and I don't like him. Diana looked from the child to the father. She set down her coffee on the bench beside her. All right, she said. Tacos. Zoe cheered and ran back to the climbing structure to finish what she had started, because Zoe James did not leave things unfinished. And Calvin sat on the bench with Diana Hartwell in the Saturday morning park and thought about how strange it was. How the things you didn't plan were sometimes the things that mattered most. How you could spend years building careful walls around your life, and then a child with no patience for unnecessary walls could simply walk around them. At the taco place, Zoe explained to Diana in great detail why triangles were a better shape than rectangles, and Diana listened with the same quality of attention Calvin had noticed from the very beginning, complete present, as if the person talking was the most important thing happening in that moment. He watched her listening to his daughter. He watched Zoe responding to being listened to, becoming more animated, more herself. Something moved in his chest. He didn't give it a name. He wasn't ready to give it a name. But it moved and it was real. And he sat there eating his tacos and watching the two of them talk and thought, this is dangerous. The good kind and the bad kind, both at the same time, the way most dangerous things were. After lunch, walking back toward the park, Zoe slipped ahead and Diana walked beside Calvin, and she said quietly, She's going to be incredible. She already is, he said. She gets that from you, too. He looked at her. She was looking straight ahead. Her hands were in her jacket pockets, and her shoulders were down, and she looked for maybe the first time since he had known her like she was not holding anything, like she had set something down somewhere in the last 2 hours and forgotten to pick it back up. He thought about saying something. He thought about several things. He didn't say any of them. But walking beside her in the Saturday afternoon with Zoe somewhere ahead of them and the city quiet and unhurried around them, he allowed himself just for a little while to not calculate the distance between himself and the things he wanted. Just to walk. Just to be in the same space as another person without armor. Just for a little while. The procurement records were still in his notebook at home. Gerald Stanton's name was still written at the top of his list. The problem was still waiting for him. But right now in this ordinary hour, the bridge was being built. Slowly, carefully, with everything that needed to hold weight being made to hold it. And that was enough. For right now, it was enough. Part 3. The weight of what we carry. The structural inspector Calvin called was named Rosa Mendez, and she had the particular quality of a person who had spent 20 years being the most competent person in every room she entered, and had long since stopped needing anyone to acknowledge it. She showed up on Monday morning with a hard hat, a clipboard, a laser measurement tool, and exactly zero interest in small talk. You said it was grade 40 and a grade 60 spec, she said, standing outside the site trailer not even fully through the door yet. That's what the delivery records suggest. Show me. He showed her the photographs. She studied them for 4 minutes without saying anything. Then she set them down and looked at him with an expression that was not quite anger and not quite alarm, but contained elements of both. How long has it been in the ground? 7 months. Load-bearing columns. Primary support on the east span. She picked up the photographs again. Looked at the initialing pattern on the inspection record. Someone went back and changed these. That's my read. Who had sign-off authority on materials acceptance at the time of delivery? Gerald Stanton, Executive Director of Operations. Rosa looked at him over the photographs. She had known Calvin for 8 years, long enough to know that he did not use words like suggest when he was uncertain, and he did not call her in the middle of an investigation unless he was already most of the way sure. What do you need from me? I need an independent assessment of the east span columns. Non-invasive if possible. I don't want to alert anyone that we're looking. Rebound hammer testing, ground penetrating radar. I can give you a material composition read without opening anything up. She put the photographs down. Timeline. As fast as you can do it without it looking like an emergency. 3 days. Can you do it in 2? She gave him the look that meant she was already planning how to do it in 2. I'll need access to the east span without a crowd. Early mornings, before 6, I'll have Derek keep the crew on the west section. And if the results confirm what you think... Calvin was quiet for a moment. Then we deal with what's true. Rosa nodded. She put her clipboard under her arm. You know, most people would have quietly finished the project and hoped for the best. I know. That's why I came. She walked toward the east span without looking back. He watched her go. He thought about the families who had already moved into the other 3 buildings. He thought about how many times a day someone walked through those lobbies, climbed those stairs, stood in those structures, trusting that the people who built them had done it right. He thought about the version of himself from 15 years ago, who had flagged a problem and been told it was within acceptable parameters, and the version of himself that had lived with the outcome of that decision for the rest of his life. He was not going to be that version again. He went back to work. The charity event was Diana's idea, and it had been on the company calendar for 6 weeks before Calvin knew anything about it. Sandra mentioned it to him on a Tuesday, almost as an afterthought, while going over the schedule for the following Friday. Ms. Hartwell wanted to make sure you knew you and your family are invited, Sandra said. It's a waterfront community event. Local families, employees, some city officials. She wants the crew to feel appreciated. Calvin looked up from the schedule. My family. She specifically said employees and their families. He thought about Zoe, and about how Zoe had taken to Diana at the taco place with the trusting speed that children had before experience taught them to be careful. He thought about whether it was a good idea to let those 2 worlds overlap any more than they already had. He told himself it was a company event. He told himself Zoe would enjoy it. He told himself these were the true reasons and not just the most convenient ones. I'll be there, he told Sandra. He called Zoe that afternoon at noon as usual. She was already mid-sentence when he picked up something about a math test and how the teacher had asked a trick question and Zoe had not been tricked. Daddy, she said when she finished explaining her triumph. Is it true we're going to a party? How do you know about that? You called Mrs. Patterson to watch me, and then she texted Mom's sister, and her sister told... She stopped, probably because she had realized this sentence revealed a surveillance network that Calvin had not been fully aware of. Someone told me, she finished diplomatically. It's not a party, it's a company event. Will there be food? Probably. Will Diana be there? He paused. She runs the company, Zoe. So yes. Okay. He could hear the specific tone of his daughter processing something in the way she processed things quietly, thoroughly, and usually arriving at a conclusion he hadn't predicted. Daddy. Yeah. Do you like Diana? The question was so simple and so direct that it landed before he had time to arrange a careful answer around it. She's a colleague, he said. That's not what I asked. He stared at the wall of the site trailer. His 8-year-old daughter, the one who argued like him, was currently doing exactly that. I think she's a good person, he said, and a good CEO. Tyler from my class is a good person, and I don't like him that way. Zoe. I'm just saying there's a difference. How do you even know about that difference? You're 8. Almost 9, she said, and I watch things. He exhaled slowly. I'll pick you up at 5 on Friday. Okay. A pause. Daddy? Yeah. It's okay if you like her. I liked her too. He sat with that for a moment. Eat your lunch, he said. I already did. I ate fast because I wanted to talk to you. Of course you did. He felt the smile come before he could stop it. Go back to class. Love you, Daddy. Love you more. Infinite. Infinite plus 1. That's still not... Goodbye, Zoe, He heard her laughing as he hung up. He sat in the trailer and looked at the wall for a moment longer than necessary, and then he went back to work. Rosa delivered her report on Thursday evening. She came into the trailer and set it on the desk and stood while Calvin read it, which was how he knew the results were serious. Rosa Mendez did not stand while people read her reports unless she thought they might need someone in the room. He read it twice. The rebar in the primary east span support columns tested at material strength consistent with grade 40 specification. The variance from grade 60 design requirements was 33% in tensile strength. The columns would perform within safe parameters under standard load conditions. Under seismic stress, sustained maximum pedestrian load combined with severe weather event or extended load creep over 10 to 15 years, the margin of safety dropped to levels Rosa described in the report as not meeting professional engineering standards for public infrastructure. It needs to be fixed, Calvin said. Yes. What's the remediation? Column reinforcement. It can be done from the exterior. You're not pouring over or excavating what's already set. It's expensive and it adds time, but it's doable. How much time? 6 weeks minimum, maybe 8. Calvin looked at the report. 6 to 8 weeks on top of an already adjusted schedule. An already impatient group of investors. A project that Diana had staked her company's reputation on completing. And the other 3 properties, he said. The completed buildings. Rosa set another thinner report beside the first one. She had moved fast. He had asked her to check the other properties as part of what they described to building management as a routine quality review courtesy inspection. 2 of the 3 are consistent with the waterfront project, same rebar variance, same procurement pattern. The third one is clean. Which 2? She told him. He wrote the addresses in his notebook. He looked at them for a moment. Then he looked up at Rosa. What's your professional assessment of the risk in the existing buildings, right now tonight? No immediate danger, Rosa said. These are not structures on the verge of failure. They're structures with a reduced safety margin that will become progressively more relevant as the building's age and load accumulates. She paused. In plain language, nobody is in danger tonight, but someone should be in danger eventually if nobody does anything about it. How long before it becomes a real risk? 10 years without intervention, maybe less if there are seismic events. She looked at him. Calvin, this is fraud. This is not a design error. Someone deliberately substituted inferior materials and falsified the inspection records. You need to take this to people with the authority to act on it. I know. You need to take it to more than just the CEO. I know that too. She held his gaze. What are you going to do? I'm going to give Diana what she needs to make a decision, he said. And then I'm going to back her up when she makes it. Rosa picked up her hard hat and her clipboard. At the door, she stopped. You know, when you called me and told me what you were looking at, I thought maybe you were wrong. I know. I really hoped you were wrong. Me too, he said. She left. He sat with the 2 reports in front of him and the weight of them pressing down. He was not someone who indulged in the luxury of wishing things were different. It was a habit he had given up years ago because it cost too much and returned nothing. But in that particular moment, sitting in the trailer with the river moving outside and the partially built bridge standing against the evening sky, he wished simply and clearly that the numbers in those reports were different. That the problem he had found was smaller. That the solution was easier. He picked up his phone. He called Diana. She answered on the first ring. I was waiting, she said, which meant she had known the report was coming and had been sitting somewhere with her phone in her hand. Rosa's results are in, he said. I need to see you tonight. A pause. How bad? He thought about how to answer that. Come to the site, he said. I'll show you everything. She came alone. No Sandra. No driver. She parked her own car and walked to the trailer in the dark, And when she came through the door and sat down across from him, she was wearing exactly the same expression she had worn at the coffee shop when he had shown her the procurement records. The expression of a person who has already half known something terrible and is now receiving the confirmation. He walked her through both reports. He walked her through his procurement analysis. He laid it out in order, evidence, interpretation, conclusion, the same way he would present it to an engineering board, because he respected her enough to give her the complete picture and not the edited version. She listened without interrupting. She asked 3 questions, all of them precise and relevant. When he finished, she sat back and was quiet for a long time. 6 years? She said finally. At minimum. The earliest transaction I can tie to this pattern is 6 years ago. My father was sick 6 years ago. She said it flatly. He was still technically running the company, but Gerald was handling most of the day-to-day operations. Calvin said nothing. He let her put the pieces together herself, because she was someone who needed to put them together herself. Gerald ran the operational side of the company for almost 2 years while my father was declining, she said. I was in graduate school. I came back when Dad was diagnosed, but I was managing the family side of things, not the business side. She stopped. Gerald told me everything was fine. Every week. He called me every Sunday morning and told me the company was fine. Diana, don't, she said. It wasn't sharp. It was just contained. Like a door she needed to keep closed right now so the room behind it didn't spill out into everything else. Don't tell me it's not my fault again. I need to be angry first. He nodded. He understood that too. She sat with the anger for a moment. He watched it move across her face, not a dramatic anger, not the explosive kind, but the slow burning kind that was far more dangerous. The kind that found its way into decisions. What are the options? She said. 3 of them. He had thought about this before she arrived. Option 1, we address the waterfront project remediation and handle the other 2 properties quietly through a private structural review. We tell Gerald we found additional issues in a routine quality review. We fix everything nobody outside the company knows. And Gerald. Gerald keeps his position. The fraud is buried. The company avoids scandal. She looked at him. What's option 2? We take everything to the board. Full disclosure. We present the evidence. We recommend Gerald's removal. We initiate a legal review of the procurement chain. The company controls the narrative. You got ahead of it. You found the problem. You fixed it. There's damage, but it's manageable damage. And option 3. Option 3 is what happens if we do nothing and someone else finds it first. He held her gaze. A building inspector on a routine review. A structural failure in one of the existing properties. An anonymous tip from someone in the procurement chain who decides they're holding too much risk. He paused. In that scenario, you don't control anything. She looked at the reports on the desk between them. She looked at them for a long time. He could see her thinking, not just processing, but actually thinking, working through it, the way engineers worked through problems, following the load paths, finding where the weight fell. The people in those buildings, she said. Yes. They don't know. No. They wake up every morning and go to work and come home, and they don't know that the building they're in doesn't meet the spec it was designed to. She said it slowly, like she was reading it out of something. My company built that. My name is on that company. Diana. She looked up. Option 1 was never really an option, he said. I only said it because you needed to hear all 3. She held his gaze. Then, slowly, something in her face settled. Like a building finding its footings. Like something that had been slightly off balance returning to center. No, she said. It wasn't. Option 2 means your company takes a serious hit. I know. It might mean legal exposure, regulatory review, investor loss. I know all of that. It's going to be a hard year. Calvin. She said his name the way she said it when she needed him to stop explaining what she already understood. My father built this company. If what Gerald did stays buried, if I make the decision to protect the company over the people in those buildings, then the company isn't worth protecting. She paused. My father would agree with that. He looked at her for a moment. He thought about what she had told him at the coffee shop, about how her father used to say that the work you couldn't see was the work that mattered most, about foundations and integrity. Okay, he said. Then we go to the board. After the charity event, she said. Friday night. I want one more day where the team doesn't know what's coming. They've been working so hard. I don't want to take this week from them. He nodded. He understood the impulse to protect the people who had done the real work from the consequences of the people who hadn't. Friday night then, he said. We'll have everything ready to present Saturday morning. She started gathering the reports. He helped her organize them. Their hands were close on the desk, and neither of them moved away. It was a small thing. It was not a small thing. He was aware of it the way you were aware of a sound that had been in the background for so long you had stopped noticing it, and then for one moment you heard it clearly and understood it had always been there. She looked up. Their eyes met at close range in the small trailer. She looked back down at the papers. Saturday, she said. Saturday, he confirmed. Chen. Friday came, the way Fridays came after hard weeks, with the specific quality of a breath held too long finally releasing. The charity event was set up along the waterfront near the construction site, with tables and lights and food trucks, and a section where kids could build things out of oversized wooden blocks. The whole setup had the comfortable, genuine feeling of something that had been arranged by people who actually cared about the occasion, instead of people staging a photo opportunity. Zoe wearing a bright orange jacket Calvin had bought her specifically because she had said orange was her favorite color, and then never owned anything. Orange attached herself to the wooden block area within the first 3 minutes of arriving. She was already organizing the other children by the time Calvin had gotten himself a cup of coffee. Derek found him near the edge of the event, watching the crew and their families spread out into the evening. Good turnout, Derek said. Yeah, Trevor brought his mother. Derek nodded toward a pair across the space. Trevor standing a little taller than usual, talking to an older woman who was clearly the source of his patient eyes and his serious bearing. She hasn't been to a company event in the 6 years he's been here. Why tonight? Because tonight he had something to be proud of. Derek looked at Calvin. That's on you. That's on Trevor. You gave him the reason. Derek drank his coffee. Some things you can't give a man. But a reason sometimes that's all a man needs, and nobody thought to give it to him. Calvin looked at him. He thought about all the things he wanted to say, and settled on, how are your boys? Derek's face did the specific thing it did when his sons came up a warmth that arrived ahead of any expression like the heat before the flame. The 19-year-old got offered a walk-on tryout for a college team. Nothing guaranteed, but the door opened. That's a big door. Big enough. Derek looked like a man who was trying not to let his pride get too large in case it invited bad luck, which was a habit Calvin recognized as belonging to a specific kind of father. The 23-year-old got a job. Yeah. Starts Monday. It's just warehouse work, but he called me to tell me about it, and he sounded... Derek stopped. He sounded like himself, like the kid I remember before he got lost for a while. He was quiet. That's all you want for them, you know, just to come back to themselves. Calvin looked across the event space to where Zoe was now apparently running some kind of architectural committee for the other children, gesturing at a structure they were building with both hands and complete authority. Yeah, he said, I know exactly what you mean. Diana arrived later than the others. She came across the waterfront walk with Sandra half a step behind her, and Calvin watched her make the transition he had seen her make before, from the version of herself that carried the company to the version of herself that could exist in a space with regular people on a Friday evening. It was not a false transition. Both versions were her. But one of them wore more weight, and watching her set some of that weight down, even temporarily, had become something he noticed. She stopped to talk to Trevor's mother. Calvin watched her listen the same quality of attention she brought to every conversation, and watched Trevor's mother's face change as she talked to the CEO of the company where her son worked and found that the CEO was actually listening to what she was saying. Zoe materialized at Calvin's elbow. "She came," she said. "She's the one who organized this." "I know, but she still came." Zoe looked up at him with the particular expression she wore when she was making a point she considered self-evident. She didn't have to stay and talk to people. She could have just shown up and left. But she's staying. Calvin looked at his daughter. "When did you get so observant?" "I've always been observant. You just don't always notice." She ran back to her block structure. He was still looking after her when Diana appeared beside him. She had a drink in her hand and a tired quality around her eyes that the evening light didn't quite hide. "How is she doing?" Diana asked, nodding toward Zoe. "She's redesigning the structural specs of whatever those kids are building. She does not get that from anyone in particular." He almost smiled. "How are you doing?" "Oh, honestly." She looked at the event around her. "Better than I expected." She paused. "I keep thinking about tomorrow, about the board meeting, about what comes after." She turned to look at him. "And then I look at this, and I think this is why. These people, Derek and Trevor and Sam and all of them, this is what it was supposed to be about." "It still can be," he said, "on the other side of tomorrow." She was quiet. "I keep thinking about what my father would say." "What do you think he'd say?" "He'd say do the right thing and let the chips fall." She paused. "He'd say it in a more complicated way because he always had to explain his metaphors fully, but that would be the point." "He sounds like someone worth listening to." He was. She looked at the partially built bridge framed against the evening sky. "You would have liked him too. He thought about things the way you do, from the ground up." They stood together watching the event. The crew were relaxed in the way people were relaxed when they were in a space where they were genuinely respected, and Calvin felt the specific satisfaction of having been part of building that. Not the bridge, the atmosphere. The small daily accumulation of being treated like a person who mattered. Zoe came running over with another child in tow, a girl about her age with braids and a serious expression. "Daddy, this is Harper. She wants to know if you can help us because the structure keeps falling on the east side and nobody can figure out why." Calvin looked at Diana. Diana looked at Calvin. They both looked at the small girl named Harper, waiting patiently for an engineer to solve her problem. "I'll be right there," Calvin told his daughter. He spent 20 minutes helping Zoe and Harper and 3 other children figure out why their block structure kept falling, which required him to kneel on the ground and explain load distribution to a group of children between the ages of 7 and 10 in terms they could follow. He used the rope analogy, pulling in opposite directions to create balance, and watched their faces change when they understood. Diana stood nearby and watched him. She didn't pretend she wasn't watching. He was aware of her watching and didn't pretend he wasn't aware. It was that kind of evening. When the structure was standing and the children had declared victory and run off to find food, Calvin stood up and found Diana a few feet behind him. "You're good at that," she said. "Engineering or children?" "Both. The way you explain things, you make it feel possible. Like whatever the problem is, there's a real answer." She paused. "Not everyone can do that." "Can do. My wife was better at it," he said. He said it naturally without the careful handling he usually gave that topic. "She had this way of making you believe the answer existed before you'd even started looking for it." He looked at the block structure the children had left standing. "I learned to explain things clearly from watching her teach. She was a teacher. 5th grade, for 4 years." He looked at his hands. Then she wasn't. Diana was quiet. He felt her beside him, not filling the silence, just holding it with him, which was exactly the right thing to do, and not everyone knew how. "Her name was Angela," he said. "Nobody on the waterfront project knew that. He had not said her name to anyone in this city. She would have laughed at me being this far from home. She always said I hid from the world by making myself useful in very small geographic areas. That's not hiding, Diana said carefully. She meant it kindly. A pause. She was right too. She usually was. What would she say about this? About the investigation? About what you found? He thought about it honestly. She'd say, do the right thing even if it costs you. He looked at Diana. And then she'd make me eat something because she thought every important conversation went better on a full stomach. Diana laughed. The same surprised laugh as before, the real one that came before she could manage it. I like her. Yeah, Calvin said it quietly and simply. Me too. They moved away from the main crowd without planning to. Just a gradual drift toward the edge of the event space, toward the waterfront railing where the river moved below them, and the city lights broke apart on the surface of the water. It was an accident of proximity, and the way conversations carried people places without their deciding to go. They stood at the railing. The sounds of the event came from behind them, but softly, pleasantly muted. The bridge frame stood in the near distance, its cables and supports catching the light. It's going to be beautiful, Diana said, when it's finished. It already is. You just have to know how to look at it. She turned to look at him. That's what you do, isn't it? You see the finished thing inside the incomplete one. He looked at the bridge. I see the problems mostly. That's the same thing. You can only see the problems if you already know what it's supposed to be. She turned back to the water. Most people see what's there. You see what's possible, and then you check whether the reality is heading toward it. He was quiet. He looked at her profile, the specific quality of attention she brought to whatever she was thinking about, the way she stood like someone who had decided the ground was solid before she stood on it. A man from the city planning office, someone Calvin had seen at 2 previous meetings, walked past them along the waterfront railing. He slowed when he saw them. He gave them the particular look of someone who was revising a category he had put 2 people in. A small, knowing smile. Calvin saw the smile. He was aware of what it meant. He was aware of how they were standing close, the way you stood with someone when the physical distance had shortened without either of you deciding to shorten it. He stepped back. Just a few inches. Just enough. And then he said it. Not planned, not calculated, just the honest nervousness of a man who had not stood this close to this kind of thing in a long time and could feel the ground shifting. Careful, he said with a small self-conscious laugh. People would think we're together. Diana turned and looked at him. She did not laugh. She did not step back to match his step. She held her ground and she looked at him, and in the light off the water, her face was completely open in a way he had only seen it a handful of times. Would that be bad? She said. He looked at her. He felt the question go through him the way the important questions went, not through the thinking part of him, but through something underneath it. The part he had kept very quiet for a very long time. He opened his mouth. His phone vibrated. He looked down. It was a text from Derek. He read it, and the warmth of the moment dropped away, and something cold settled in its place. Someone accessed the procurement files tonight. Gerald's office flagged unusual access from a supervisor-level login. He knows someone's been looking. Calvin looked up at Diana. Her expression changed the moment she read his face. What happened? She said. He showed her the text. She read it. The openness in her face closed not into blankness, but into something sharper, more focused. The CEO she was returning like a layer she had set aside for the evening and now picked back up. He knows, she said. He knows someone's been looking. He doesn't know what we found yet. How long before he figures out it was you? Tonight, Calvin said. If he runs the access log, he'll see my login within the hour. She was already pulling out her phone. I need to call the board chair tonight, before Gerald can make a move. Diana? He touched her arm, just for a moment, just enough. She stopped and looked at him. If you call the board tonight, everything moves fast. Gerald's going to fight it. He's going to come at me. You need to be ready for that. I'm ready. He's going to question my credibility, my background. He's going to use the gap in my resume, the firm that questioned my judgment before. Let him, she said. It came out quiet and certain and utterly without hesitation. Let him try. She looked at him with the full weight of her attention, all of it, nothing held back. "I've read everything you've written, and I've watched you work, and I've seen what you found and how you found it. Let him try." Calvin looked at her. He held that for a moment, what it felt like to have someone stand in front of you and mean what they said with no qualification. "Okay," he said. She turned back to her phone and started moving, already composing in her head, already 3 steps into what needed to happen. He watched her and felt something settle into place, not a resolution, not a conclusion, but a direction. The way a load finds its path through a structure, and you can feel it the moment it clicks into balance. Zoe appeared from the event behind them, orange jacket, vivid in the evening. She ran to Calvin and grabbed his hand, and then looked up at both of them with the clear, uncomplicated perception of a child. "Is everything okay?" she said. Calvin looked down at his daughter. He squeezed her hand. "Working on it," he said. "You always fix things," she said simply, as if this were a natural law. He looked at Diana. Diana looked at him. Neither one of them said what they were thinking. Neither one of them had to. The phone calls were about to start. Gerald Stanton was about to find out exactly what Calvin had found, and he was going to do what cornered men did, fight with everything he had. And Calvin was going to have to stand up in front of a board of directors and present the truth against the word of a man who had 9 years and the weight of the past on his side. But right now, in this moment, standing between the daughter who had never stopped believing he could fix things, and the woman who had just told him she would stand beside him when the room tried to make him small again, he felt something he had not allowed himself to feel in a very long time. He felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The river moved below the railing. The bridge stood in its incomplete, inevitable form. The lights of the city scattered across the water, and Calvin James held his daughter's hand and waited for what was coming. Diana made 3 phone calls that night. The first was to the board chair, a 71-year-old man named Arthur Price, who had known her father for 30 years, and who answered at 11:15 at night with the alertness of someone who had never fully stopped expecting bad news. The second was to the company's legal counsel. The third was to Gerald Stanton himself. That last call was Calvin's idea. "Call him before he calls you." Calvin had told her, standing at the waterfront railing with Zoe asleep against his shoulder, having run out of energy somewhere between the food trucks and the walk back to the car. "If you call him first, he knows you already have enough. It changes the calculation. He'll try to negotiate. Let him try. Anything he says tonight, say it in front of your lawyer." She had looked at him. "You've done this before." "I've been on the other side of it," he said. "I know what it looks like from there." She called Gerald at 11:40. He answered on the second ring, which meant he had been awake and waiting. She put the call on speaker with her attorney, listening on a separate line. She said 3 sentences. She told him she was aware of the materials procurement discrepancies. She told him she had documentation. She told him there would be an emergency board meeting Saturday morning and that his attendance was required. Gerald said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, "Diana, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "There hasn't," she said, and she hung up. She called Calvin immediately after. "It's done," she said. "How'd he sound?" "Like a man calculating his options. He'll spend tonight trying to find a way to make this about you or about me. Something to put in front of the board before we do." "I know." A pause. "Get some rest, Calvin. You too." Neither of them slept much. Day. The board meeting was at 9 in the morning in the same 32nd floor conference room where the investor briefing had been 6 weeks earlier. The same city view. The same long oval table. But the weight in the room was entirely different. Arthur Price sat at the head of the table. He was a compact, white-haired man with the kind of stillness that came from having outlasted most of the crises he'd ever faced. 5 other board members ranged down the table. The company's legal counsel sat to Diana's right. Sandra sat near the door with a tablet, not because she was needed for notes, but because Diana had wanted a person she trusted near the entrance. Gerald Stanton arrived 2 minutes before 9 with his own attorney, a man in an expensive suit who looked like he had been dressed in a hurry and was compensating with posture. Gerald himself looked like a man who had decided overnight which mask to wear and had settled on calm authority. He sat down, straightened his jacket, and looked at Calvin across the table. Calvin looked back. Gerald said, "I'm not sure why Mr. James is in this meeting. He's a site supervisor, not a board member or an executive." "He's here because he found what we're discussing," Diana said, "and because he documented it." She opened the folder in front of her. "Let's begin." She walked through it the way Calvin had walked her through it, in order without editorializing, following the evidence from one point to the next. The rebar specification discrepancy. The altered inspection records. Rosa Mendez's independent structural assessment. The procurement billing analysis across all 4 projects. The pattern that connected them. The dollar differential that had gone somewhere that was not the company's accounts. The room was very quiet. Arthur Price asked 2 questions during the presentation, both precise, both focused on the evidentiary chain. He asked them without looking at Gerald. When Diana finished, Gerald's attorney leaned forward. "What you've presented is circumstantial. Initialing over a notation could be a routine correction. Material grade discrepancies between specification and delivery happen on construction projects regularly. The ground-penetrating radar results are not circumstantial," Calvin said. It was the first time he had spoken. He said it quietly without heat. "The material composition testing is not circumstantial. The rebar in the east span columns tests at grade 40. The spec calls for grade 60. That's not a paperwork question that's in the ground." "Mr. James," Gerald said. His voice had the careful evenness of someone who had prepared this. "I'd like to ask the board to consider something before we go further." He turned from Calvin to the board members. "I've been with this company for 9 years. I managed operations through one of the most difficult transitions in our history when Robert Hartwell was declining and someone had to keep things running." He did not look at Diana. "Mr. James has been with us for 7 weeks. 7 weeks. Before that, there is a significant gap in his professional record that has not been satisfactorily explained." He paused. "I'd like to know who authorized this internal investigation. Who authorized an outside inspector to access company properties? Who authorized a site supervisor, however competent, to go through executive-level procurement records?" The room shifted. Calvin felt it the subtle rebalancing that happened when someone introduced a different set of questions. He had known it was coming. He had known it would feel exactly like this. Arthur Price looked at Gerald. "Are you suggesting the records are fabricated?" "I'm suggesting that before we act on the findings of someone with a disputed professional history who has been in this company for less than 2 months, we should understand the full picture." "What disputed history?" Diana said. "There was a situation at his previous firm," Gerald said. "A project he flagged concerns on. His recommendations were questioned by senior engineers. He left under circumstances that were—" "He left," Diana said, "because the firm chose to cover up a foundation failure rather than take responsibility for it. And because they found it easier to question his judgment than admit he was right." She looked directly at Gerald. "He was right, and they covered it up. Sound familiar?" Silence. Gerald looked at Calvin. "I'm sure Mr. James has his version of events." Calvin said, "I don't have a version. I have the geotechnical report from that project, which is a matter of public record. I have the settlement documents from the subsequent litigation, which are also public record. And I have 15 years of work that speaks for itself." He held Gerald's gaze. "But you're not actually asking about my history, Mr. Stanton. You're hoping that if the board spends long enough looking at me, they'll run out of time to look at what I found." Gerald's attorney put a hand on his client's arm. A small gesture, a telling one. Arthur Price had been watching Calvin the entire time. Now he picked up the independent structural report and looked at it for a moment. He set it back down. "Gerald," he said, "the rebar test results. The material composition analysis by an independent licensed inspector. Do you dispute those findings?" A pause. "I would want a second independent review," That's not what I asked. Arthur's voice was completely even. Do you dispute the findings? Another pause. Longer. No, Gerald said finally. I don't dispute the technical findings. Then we're not arguing about what's in the ground, Arthur said. We're arguing about how it got there, and who knew. The room fell into a silence that had a specific quality, the silence of a question that everyone knew the answer to and nobody needed to say out loud. Gerald looked at his attorney. His attorney looked at the table. Diana looked at Calvin. He gave her the smallest nod. She turned to the board. I'm recommending Gerald's immediate suspension pending a full legal review of the procurement chain. I'm recommending engagement of an independent forensic accountant to trace the billing differentials across all 4 projects. And I'm recommending that we retain Rosa Mendez's firm to oversee the structural remediation of all affected properties, starting with the 2 completed buildings. She paused. The people living and working in those buildings don't know they're in an affected structure. We need to fix that before we do anything else. That's going to be expensive, one of the board members said. Not challenging, just noting. Yes, Diana said. It is. She looked at the board member directly. It's also the right thing to do, and it's what we're going to do. Arthur Price looked down the table. All in favor of the interim measures proposed by Ms. Hartwell. 5 hands went up. The 6th board member, a man named Porter, who had been hired during Gerald's tenure, looked at the table and did not raise his hand. He did not oppose either. He simply sat with the particular stillness of someone who had just understood which way the weight was falling and had decided to get out from under it. Motion carries, Arthur said. Gerald stood up. He straightened his jacket again, the same gesture he had made when he arrived, the instinct for composed appearance that persisted even when everything else had collapsed. He looked at Diana. Your father would not have done this, he said. He believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt. Diana looked at him without flinching. My father believed in foundations, she said. He believed in building things that held weight and lasted. That's exactly what I'm doing. Gerald left with his attorney. The door closed. The room let out a collective breath. Arthur Price looked at Calvin. He studied him with the particular attention of a man who had spent 50 years assessing people across tables. Your papers on load dynamics, he said. The 2011 work on high groundwater bridge foundations. Calvin looked at him. You've read them. My son-in-law teaches structural engineering at the university. He mentioned them a few years back. Said the methodology was unusually practical for academic work. Arthur paused. Said it read like it was written by someone who'd actually been on a job site. He held Calvin's gaze. He was right. Calvin said nothing. There was nothing to say. Good work, Arthur said. 2 words, the same ones Calvin had said to Trevor on the first week of the project. He understood now more than he had then exactly how much those 2 words could hold. The meeting ended at 11:15. The legal team stayed behind with Diana. Calvin walked out into the lobby, rode the elevator down, and stood on the sidewalk in the late morning with his hands in his jacket pockets, and the city moving around him, like it always did, indifferent to what had just happened on the 32nd floor, running on its own agenda. His phone rang. It was Derek. How'd it go? Derek said. Word traveled fast on construction crews. Derek had known something significant was happening this morning without knowing the details. It went the way it needed to go. A pause. Gerald, gone. Effective this morning. Derek was quiet for a moment. He the one who messed with the materials. That's what the investigation will establish formally. But yes. For how long? 6 years, maybe longer. Another pause, a longer one. And the bridge, our bridge, that's what the next 6 weeks are for. The remediation starts Monday. Rosa Mendez's team is taking over materials oversight. She the one you brought in for the independent check? Yes. She good? She's the best I know. Derek made the sound that wasn't quite a laugh. All right. A pause. Calvin? Yeah. You did right, Derek said. By the crew. By all of us. He said it simply the way Derek said everything that mattered directly and without extra words. I wanted you to know that. Calvin stood on the sidewalk and felt something in his chest that he didn't try to name. How's Trevor doing this morning? Running his drainage check right now. Showed up at 6:15. A beat. Kid's going to apply to the engineering program at State. Told me yesterday. Good, Calvin said. And the way he said it meant more than the word. He hung up and stood for another moment. Then he started walking. He wasn't sure where he was going at first. His truck was in the parking structure 2 blocks east. The site was across the river. Home was 40 minutes away. He just walked the way you walked when you needed the movement more than the destination. He ended up at the coffee shop. Morrow's. The same one where he had met Diana 2 weeks ago and shown her the procurement records. He ordered a coffee and sat at the same table they had sat at then. He wasn't sure why. Habit? Something else. He didn't examine it. He was halfway through the coffee when Diana walked in. She stopped when she saw him. Then she walked over and sat across from him without asking, which he noticed that she had stopped asking whether she was intruding. The legal team is filing the initial report with the State Contractor Licensing Board this afternoon, she said. Fast. Arthur wanted to move before end of day. She set her own coffee down. Gerald's attorney called on the way over here. He wants to negotiate terms. Voluntary cooperation in exchange for reduced personal liability. Will you take it? The lawyers will handle the terms. But yes, his cooperation on identifying all the affected transactions is worth something. She looked at her coffee. The faster we can establish the full scope, the faster we can address the properties. The residents. We're going to notify building management this afternoon. Individual residents get a letter by end of week. We're framing it as a proactive quality review that identified areas for improvement. She paused. Which is true. It just leaves out some context. Is that the right call? She looked at him. You think we should tell 300 families that the building they live in has a structural deficiency? I think those 300 families deserve to know the truth about the building they live in, he said. Not in a way that causes panic, but honestly. He held her gaze. You said this morning that your father believed in building things that held weight. Truth holds more weight than managed communication. She was quiet for a moment. He could see her thinking it through, not defending the original decision, but actually reconsidering it, which was one of the things about her that consistently surprised him. Most people at her level had learned to defend their first answer. She hadn't. You're right, she said. We'll be more direct in the letter. You can still do it without causing panic. Honest and calm aren't opposites. No, she said. They're not. She looked at him across the table. Is that something you've had to learn, or did you always know it? He thought about Angela. About the way she had sat with him the night after the first firm had questioned his judgment and the project had been reported as within compliance, and he had sat at the kitchen table, knowing what was going to happen to that foundation eventually, and being unable to do anything about it. She had sat next to him, not across from him. That detail was specific and permanent in his memory, and she had said, You were right, and they were wrong, and you're going to be okay. Clear and calm and true. Not making it smaller, not making it larger. Just true. Someone taught me, he said. Diana nodded. She seemed to understand without his explaining it who he meant. They sat for a while without filling the silence. The coffee shop moved around them the ordinary morning traffic of regular people, and neither of them was in a hurry, which was unusual for both of them. But the morning had been what it had been, and there was something that needed to settle before either of them moved back into the next thing. Can I ask you something? Calvin said. Yes. When Gerald said your father wouldn't have done this, does any part of you believe that? She looked at him steadily. No, she said. My father would have done exactly what I did. He would have done it sooner, probably because he had better instincts for people than I do. She paused. He would have seen Gerald for what he was before it went this far. You couldn't have seen it without something to see. I should have looked harder. Diana. He leaned forward slightly. You took over a company at 30 after your father died. You spent 2 years proving you belonged in that chair against people who thought you didn't. You kept the company growing and kept the team intact and kept the work good. He held her gaze. You can't simultaneously be doing all of that and also be auditing every person who told you they had it handled. It's not a failure of character. It's a failure of one person who chose to take advantage of your trust. He paused. The failure belongs to him. She looked at him for a long moment. Her hands were around her coffee cup, and her expression was the one he had seen at the park on Saturday morning, unguarded, lighter than her professional face, more real. You know, she said quietly, most people who've been burned the way you were burned, they get harder. They stop trusting anybody. I got careful, he said. That's different. Is it? He thought about it. Careful means you still reach for things. You just make sure the ground is solid first. He looked at her. Hard means you stop reaching. She held his gaze. And you? Are you still reaching? The question sat between them with the particular weight of a question that was about more than one thing. He looked at her. The morning light came through the window, and the city moved outside, and Zoe was at school right now, probably explaining something to someone with more confidence than the situation required, and the bridge was standing incomplete over the river, waiting for the work to finish it, and Calvin James sat across from Diana Hartwell in a coffee shop on an ordinary Saturday and felt the ground beneath him. It was solid. He knew what solid felt like. He had spent 15 years testing ground. He knew the difference. Yeah, he said. I am. She looked at him for one more moment. Then she reached across the table and put her hand over his. Not a dramatic gesture, small, deliberate, certain. The way she did everything when she had decided. Good, she said. He turned his hand over under hers. She didn't pull away. They sat like that for a while. The coffee went cold. Neither of them noticed. Outside, the city ran on its own schedule, indifferent and continuous. But inside that ordinary corner table, in a Saturday morning coffee shop, something that had been building quietly for 7 weeks in trailer offices and investor meetings and playgrounds and waterfront railings, and all the accumulated hours of two people choosing again and again to be honest with each other, finally came to rest in the place it had been heading all along. Calvin thought about what he had told Zoe about bridges, about how they held up because of the balance, about tension working in both directions, about how the thing that kept a structure standing was not the absence of opposing forces, but the precise patient arrangement of them. He thought that there were things you could only understand by building them, and then he stopped thinking and just sat there in the quiet of the morning with Diana's hand in his, and the work still ahead of them, and every reason in the world to believe it could be done. The remediation work started on a Monday, the way all the important work on the waterfront project had started before sunrise, before the city fully woke up with Calvin James already on site and already moving. Rosa Mendez's crew arrived at 6. They were efficient and quiet in the way of people who understood the seriousness of what they were there to fix. Calvin walked the east span with Rosa in the early morning cold, both of them with coffees going cold in their hands, going over the sequence for the column reinforcement work. 8 weeks, Rosa said. Maybe 7 if the weather holds. 7, Calvin said. Not because he was impatient, because he had looked at the schedule 3 times, and he knew where the time could be recovered without cutting corners. Rosa looked at him sideways. You already figured out where the time is. North section crew can run parallel on the deck work while we reinforce the columns. We don't have to sequence them. That's a tighter coordination window. Derek can handle it. He looked at the crew gathering at the equipment shed. He's been handling tight coordination windows for 20 years. He just hasn't always had someone tell him so. Rosa made a sound that meant she would trust his judgment on the crew, because she had learned over 8 years that his judgment on people was as reliable as his judgment on structures. 7 weeks then, she said. But you're buying me dinner when we finish. Deal. She walked off toward her team. Calvin turned and found Derek behind him, which happened a lot. Now Derek appearing without announcement, comfortable enough in their working relationship not to need to signal his arrival. She the one running the remediation? Derek asked, watching Rosa cross the site. Best there is? She seemed like the kind of person who eats lunch. Why? Because I want to know if I can invite her to the crew lunch on Fridays. Calvin looked at him. Derek, I'm asking professionally. My brother-in-law is also a structural engineer, and I'm just saying some people... Run your section, Calvin said. Derek walked away grinning. Calvin looked out at the bridge frame. 7 weeks. He could see it already, the way it was going to look when it was finished, the lines of it, the proportions. He had been able to see it since the first week standing at the water's edge before dawn. That was the thing about building. You had to be able to see the finished thing before you could make it real. You had to hold the image steady in your mind, even when what was in front of you was still rebar and concrete and open sky. He had learned to do that for structures. He was learning slowly and with more difficulty to do it for other things too. The notifications to residents of the 2 affected buildings went out on a Tuesday. Diana had rewritten the letter herself 3 times. Taking Calvin's words from the coffee shop, honest and calm aren't opposites, and working them into something that was both. The letter explained what had been found, what it meant in practical terms for the structural safety of the building, what the company was doing about it, and what residents could expect in terms of timeline and access for the remediation work. It did not minimize. It did not hide behind corporate language. It was the kind of letter a person wrote, not the kind a communications department approved. Diana told Calvin about it that evening by phone. He was in his truck in the parking lot of Zoe's school, waiting for the after-school program to release. She was in her office, the kind of late that had become normal for her since the board meeting. How did people respond? Calvin asked. Better than I expected. A few people are angry, which is fair. Most people are relieved to know. A few people called the company directly, just to say they appreciated being told the truth. She paused. One woman left a message saying her father had always told her that you could tell the character of a company by how they handled their mistakes. A beat. I cried a little bit. That's allowed? Not in front of Sandra. Sandra already knows. I know she knows. He could hear the exhausted, genuine warmth in her voice. But we maintain the fiction for professional reasons. He watched the doors of the school through the windshield. How's the board? Arthur Price called this afternoon. He said the transparency is generating goodwill with the city planning office. Apparently our competitors have been watching, and the fact that we got in front of this proactively is being his word noted. She paused. He also said, and I'm quoting directly, that in 30 years of board work, he has never seen a site supervisor show up to an emergency board meeting with better documentation than our legal team. Calvin said nothing. He meant it as a compliment, Diana said. I know. Are you going to say anything? Thank you, he said, for telling me. She laughed quietly. You're the most aggravating person to compliment. The school doors opened and the first wave of children came out. I see Zoe, he said. She's wearing the orange jacket and arguing with someone. Of course she is. A warmth in Diana's voice that had nothing professional in it. Tell her I said hi. Tell her yourself Friday. A brief pause. Is that an invitation? Zoe asked me this morning if Diana was coming to her school project presentation, he said. I told her I'd ask. What time? 6 o'clock. It's at the school. She built a model of a suspension bridge. I'll be there at 5:50, Diana said. And he knew she meant it because Diana Hartwell was not the kind of person who said things she didn't mean. Zoe knocked on the truck window. He unlocked the door. She climbed in, dropped her backpack, and looked at him with the specific expression she wore when she had done something well and wanted him to ask about it. How was your day? He said. I got an A on the math test, she said. And I finished my bridge model. And Tyler tried to tell me that my bridge design was wrong, and I explained why he was wrong for approximately 4 minutes, and the teacher said I was right. She buckled her seatbelt with satisfaction. It was a good day. Diana says hi. Zoe's face lit up. Is she coming Friday? 5:50. Zoe pumped her fist once with complete sincerity, the way she celebrated everything that mattered. Calvin started the truck. He thought about the suspension bridge model in his daughter's backpack, built with wooden dowels and string by an 8-year-old who had once asked him if bridges were like people because they held up from the pulling. He thought they were getting somewhere, all of them. Slowly, in the right direction. 6 weeks into the remediation on a Wednesday afternoon, Rosa pulled Calvin aside at the east span. She had her clipboard and the particular expression she wore when the numbers had confirmed what she'd hoped. "Column cores are reading clean," she said. "The reinforcement is performing exactly to spec. Better than projected. Actually, the original concrete pour quality was good. Whoever did the original work did it right. It was just the rebar they shorted." "That was Derek's crew," Calvin said, "from before I came on. Good crew. Tell them that." She looked at him. "You're going to make me go tell a bunch of construction workers they did good concrete work. I'm going to make you go tell them that the part of this structure they're responsible for is solid." "Yes." He held her gaze. "It matters." She exhaled through her nose. "Fine." She walked toward Derek's section clipboard under her arm. Calvin watched her go, and watched Derek look up when she approached, and watched the slight defensive set of Derek's shoulders relax, as Rosa said what she'd come to say. He watched Derek nod. Turn to his crew. Repeat it. He didn't hear the words. He didn't need to. The work continued through the afternoon, and Calvin moved through the site the way he always did, with a specific quality of attention that had always been his most important tool. The one no resume category captured. The one that came from years of learning. That the most important things on a construction site were usually the things nobody was currently looking at. Gerald Stanton's legal situation was developing through channels Calvin had no direct involvement in. The forensic accountant Diana had engaged had established a billing differential across the 4 projects that totaled just over $2.3 million, routed through a shell company Gerald had established 4 years into his tenure. The State Contractor Licensing Board had opened a formal investigation. Gerald had hired a second attorney. The first round of depositions had been scheduled. Calvin had given his statement once in writing, supported by the documentation he had assembled. He had been precise and complete, and then he had stepped back because the investigation belonged to the people with the authority to conduct it, and his job was to build things. He did not think about Gerald often. He thought about the bridge. He thought about the families in the 2 buildings who were now getting their structures fixed properly, who now knew what they were living in and what was being done about it. He thought about the difference between carrying a secret that protected people and carrying a secret that protected only the people doing the hiding. He had spent years living in proximity to other people's hidden things. The firm that had buried his recommendations, the project that had quietly settled its fractures out of the public record. He had decided, sitting in the site trailer with Rosa Mendez's report in his hands, that he was done being adjacent to things that were hidden. That whatever it cost, he would rather stand in a room and say what was true than carry the weight of knowing and not speaking. The weight had been heavier than he remembered, but he had carried it to the right place. And now it was set down, and he could breathe in a way he had not been able to breathe in a long time. Zoe's school project presentation was in the gymnasium at 6 o'clock on a Friday. 23 children from her class presented their bridge models on long tables, arranged in a horseshoe, and parents and family moved along the tables while the children explained their work. The noise level was extraordinary, the particular joy chaos of children who have worked hard on something and are ready to tell everyone about it. Diana arrived at 5:48. Calvin saw her come in. She had come straight from the office, still in work clothes, but she had her hair down, which he had noticed she did on the evenings when she was trying to leave the day behind her. She scanned the room and found him in about 4 seconds, which told him she had been looking for him specifically and not the general location of the tables. She walked over. "I'm not late." "You're 12 minutes early." "I said 5:50. You said 5:50 and arrived at 5:48. That's early." "I drove fast." She looked around the gymnasium. Where's the bridge? Table 7. She's been guarding it for the last 20 minutes. They found Zoe at table 7 standing in front of a suspension bridge model built from wooden dowels, balsa wood, and string approximately 2 feet long with 2 towers and cables that actually bore the weight of a small platform in the center. The cables were uneven in one place, where she had retied them 3 times, trying to get the tension right. The towers were straight. The platform in the center held a row of small plastic figures that Zoe had arranged carefully, each one facing forward, as if crossing the bridge. Diana stopped in front of the model and looked at it for a long moment. "Tell me about it," she said to Zoe. Zoe looked at Diana with the evaluating gaze she gave everyone before deciding how much of herself to give them. Apparently, she still passed the evaluation because Zoe stepped into full presentation mode, which involved her standing up straight and using her hands. "It's a suspension bridge," she said. "The towers hold up the cables and the cables hold up the deck. The key is the tension you have to get the cable length exactly right, or one side pulls more than the other and the whole thing tilts." She pointed to the uneven section. "I had to redo that part, because the first time I got the length wrong and it pulled the tower 6 degrees off vertical." "How did you fix it?" Diana asked. "I measured it from the center point instead of from each end. Daddy showed me that if you measure from the middle, out, the 2 sides are always equal." She looked at Calvin. "Right?" "Right," he said. Diana leaned down to look at the model from the level of the small platform. She looked at the plastic figures standing on it. "Why are they facing forward?" Zoe considered this. "Because they're crossing," she said, as if this were self-evident. "If you're on a bridge, you're going somewhere. You don't look back." Diana straightened up. She looked at Calvin. He looked back at her. Neither of them said anything, because some things didn't need to be said, and it was possible to know that about a person, to know which moments were for speaking and which were for just being in together. The teacher came by a young woman with a clipboard who told Zoe her model was one of the most structurally sophisticated in the class, and Zoe received this information with the composure of someone who had expected to be told this, but was still glad to hear it. Calvin watched his daughter and felt the particular variety of pride that parents feel not at what their children have done, but at who they are revealing themselves to be, the specific person already present inside the child, becoming more visible every year. After the presentation, the 3 of them went for tacos. It was Zoe's choice. It was always Zoe's choice, and neither of the adults at the table had any inclination to argue. They sat in the same restaurant where they had sat the Saturday of the park, in a booth this time, and Zoe explained to Diana the further development of her theory that triangles were superior to rectangles, which Diana engaged with seriously, and at length proposing counter-arguments that Zoe worked through systematically. Calvin watched them. He did the thing he had learned to do. He let himself just sit inside the moment without measuring the distance to anything, without calculating risk or outcome or what came next. Just the booth and the tacos and the noise of a Friday evening restaurant and his daughter holding court across the table. He had not done that, just sat inside something in a long time. He had spent so many years making sure everything was solid before he put weight on it that he had forgotten what it felt like to simply be somewhere and trust it. He was remembering. Diana caught him watching her and raised an eyebrow across the table. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "You're making a face." "I don't make faces." "Daddy makes a face," Zoe confirmed without looking up from her taco, "when he's thinking something he doesn't want to say yet." Calvin looked at his daughter. "You're supposed to be explaining the triangle theory." "I finished." Diana agreed with me. "I didn't fully agree," Diana said. "I said the structural argument for triangles is sound, but the aesthetic case for rectangles deserves more consideration." "That's almost agreeing," Zoe said. "It's not even close to agreeing. It's closer than Daddy ever gets." Calvin leaned back in the booth and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he looked at his daughter and said, "Your mother would have loved you arguing with people at dinner." He said it before he fully decided to say it. It just came the natural placement of Angela in the room in the meal, in the specific joy of watching Zoe be entirely herself in a restaurant booth on a Friday night. It was not sad when he said it. It was just true, and true in a way that felt warm rather than heavy, which was new, or at least newer than it had been. Zoe looked at him. Her expression was quiet and serious for a moment, the child who understood more than she was supposed to. "I know," she said. I try to think about what she would have thought about things. A pause. "I think she would have liked Diana." The table was quiet. Diana looked at Zoe with an expression that was entirely unguarded. The CEO was nowhere in it. The professional posture was nowhere in it. Just a woman sitting in a restaurant booth receiving one of the most important things anyone had ever said to her. "Thank you, Zoe," she said, quietly and genuinely. Zoe nodded with the gravity of someone who had said what was true and did not need to add anything to it. Then she picked up her taco and went back to dinner because she had learned from the best that some moments were complete in themselves, and you didn't have to fill them with anything more. Calvin looked at Diana. She looked back at him. The restaurant moved around them, and it was an ordinary Friday in an ordinary city, and nothing about the moment was dramatic or constructed. It was just real. It was the kind of real that lasted. 8 weeks after the remediation began on a morning in early November, when the air had the specific cold bite that meant winter was coming and had decided to make its presence known in advance, the Riverside Waterfront Bridge was certified structurally complete. Not the whole project, the surrounding development still had months of work remaining. But the bridge itself, the pedestrian span that crossed the river and was supposed to become the signature image of the whole waterfront, was done. Properly done. Down to the last column, the last cable, the last inspection point that Rosa Mendez had signed off on with her full name and license number, which she did not do for projects she had any doubts about. The public opening was 3 weeks away, but Calvin walked it alone that morning, just him, the bridge, and the river below, before the crew arrived. He started on the east side, where the remediated columns now held everything they were designed to hold, and he walked slowly, the way he always walked, a completed structure, not inspecting, not checking, just walking, just being in it. He got to the center of the span and stopped. The river moved below him. The city spread out on both sides, just waking up, lights still on in the windows. The sky going from dark gray to the particular blue-gray of an early November morning. He stood at the railing and looked at the water and listened to the bridge. It was holding. He could feel it, the specific quality of a structure doing exactly what it was designed to do. The load distributed evenly. The cables in proper tension. The deck firm under his feet. Solid in the way that only things built correctly could be solid, not rigid, but settled. Certain of itself. He had built things his whole career. He had built them correctly and incorrectly and under good conditions and terrible ones. He had flagged problems that were ignored and fixed problems that shouldn't have existed, and walked away from situations that cost him and stayed in situations that cost him more. He had built a life for his daughter out of what remained after the worst thing that had ever happened to him, and he had built it carefully and with both hands and with everything he had. Standing in the center of that bridge on that cold November morning, he thought that the things you built when you had nothing left to prove were the truest things. The bridge wasn't going to have his name on it. His research papers had his name on them, and he'd walked away from them without much regret. But this bridge would carry people across this river for the next 50 years, and the foundations were solid, and the columns held what they were supposed to hold. And Calvin James had been in the room when it mattered, and had done the thing that needed doing. That was enough. That had always been enough. His phone rang. He looked at it. Diana. "I'm on the bridge," he said when he answered. "I know. I can see you from my car." A pause. "I just pulled up on the east side. I wanted to, I don't know. I just wanted to see it." "Come on then." He heard the car door. He stayed where he was at the center of the span and waited. He heard her footsteps on the deck before he saw her, a specific quality of footsteps he had learned, the pace she walked when she wasn't performing anything. She came to stand beside him at the railing. She looked out at the river for a moment without speaking. "It's done," she said. It's done. It's beautiful. It works, he said. That's better than beautiful. She turned and looked at him. Can it be both? He looked at the bridge. The morning light was hitting the cables now as the sky brightened and the shadows fell across the deck in long parallel lines. And the whole structure had the quality of something that had always been there, that had always been meant to be there, that had simply been waiting for the right sequence of events to call it into existence. Yeah, he said. It can be both. She leaned her forearms on the railing beside him. They stood side by side, not touching the river below them and the city coming awake around them. Arthur called yesterday, she said. Gerald's cooperation is being formalized. The forensic accounting is complete. The licensing board moves to formal action next month. And the company, surviving. She paused. More than surviving. The transparency generated exactly what you said. Honest things generate people trust us more now than before. 3 new project inquiries came in last week. She looked at the water. My father's company is going to be okay. Your company, Calvin said. She turned to look at him. It's your company, he said. You made it through this. That's not your father's work, that's yours. She held his gaze. Something moved across her face, the thing he had learned to recognize, the thing that happened when she was receiving something true that she hadn't let herself think yet. Derek told me something this week, Calvin said. What? He said Trevor got accepted into the engineering program at State. He's starting in January. He's going to keep working the site part-time and go to school. He looked at her. You made that possible. The kind of place you kept this from being. That's why a kid like Trevor had room to see what he was capable of. Diana looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, You did that. We did that, he said. That's different from either of us doing it alone. She held his gaze. The bridge held them both. Below them, the river moved, the way rivers moved, continuous and unhurried and completely indifferent to what the people on the bridges above them were deciding about their lives, which was perhaps the most useful thing about rivers. Calvin, she said. Yeah. That night at the charity event, when you said careful people would think we're together. She kept her eyes on his. And I asked, would that be bad? I remember. You were going to answer, she said. Before Derek texted, you were about to say something. He had thought about that moment many times in the week since. He had reconstructed it, the river light and her face, and the half-second before his phone had vibrated, and the world had changed the subject. He had thought about what he had been about to say, and whether it was the right thing, and whether he was ready, and whether readiness was even the right question. I was going to say no, he said. It wouldn't be bad. She looked at him. That's all. I was also going to say that I had forgotten what it felt like, to want to be somewhere with someone. He said it the way he said everything true without decoration, just the fact of it plainly. Not in a sad way. I had gotten used to not wanting things like that. It felt safer. He paused. And then it stopped feeling like safety and started feeling like a habit. What changed it? He thought about the right answer, the one that was both complete and honest. Zoe told me it was okay if I liked you, he said. First, before I admitted it to myself. Diana laughed. The real laugh, surprised and genuine and completely unmanaged. She told me something too, she said. That day at the park, when you went to get coffee. What did she say? She said, my dad is the best person I know. I thought you should know that. Diana's voice was steady, but her eyes were bright. 8 years old, just walked right up to me and said it like she was filing a report. Calvin looked at the river for a moment. She's not wrong, Diana said softly. He turned and looked at her. She was looking at him the way she had looked at him at the waterfront railing 3 months ago, completely open. No armor, no managed expression. Just her, the way she actually was when she stopped performing capable and became simply real. He reached out and took her hand. She let him. They stood at the railing in the November morning with the bridge beneath them and the river below, and the whole long work of it, the foundation, the columns, the cables, the deck, all the parts visible and invisible holding steady in every direction. "I have something to ask you," he said. "Okay." "Zoe wants to go to that Italian place on 5th for dinner Saturday. She decided last week." She decided. She is very clear that it needs to be Italian, specifically that place, specifically Saturday. "Does she need me to confirm with her directly, or can I go through you?" He looked at Diana sideways. "She gave me your number last week." She did not. "She copied it off my phone and said she might need it." He watched her face. "She texted you last Tuesday." Diana reached into her jacket pocket and looked at her phone. She scrolled. She looked up at Calvin with an expression that was trying very hard not to become a full smile and failing. "She sent me a picture of the Italian place's menu with 3 items circled." "Which 3? "The gnocchi, the tiramisu, and something called the Sunday gravy, even though it's Saturday." "That's her," Calvin said. Diana looked at the menu screenshot on her phone for a moment longer. Then she put the phone away and looked at the river. "Saturday," she said. "I'll be there." 5:50, he said. 5:48 if traffic is good. She looked at him. "I like being early." He held her hand on the railing of the bridge and the city came fully awake around them, and the cable shadows moved slowly across the deck as the sun climbed, and the river went where it was going, the way rivers always did, forward without hesitation, carrying everything the land gave it and making it part of the current. 3 weeks later, at the public opening ceremony, the mayor cut a ribbon, and a crowd of people walked across the bridge for the first time. Zoe walked in the middle with Calvin's hand on one side and Diana's on the other, and she looked down at the river through the railing with her 9-year-old gravity, the orange jacket bright against the November gray. A reporter found them at the far end of the span. The same one who had covered the project from the beginning, who had been there for the investor concerns and the Gerald Stanton story and the transparency letters to residents. She recognized Diana first, then Calvin, then looked at Zoe between them with the specific look of a journalist who has just found the image that tells the whole story. "Ms. Hartwell," she said, "there was a rumor from the charity event months ago that you and your construction supervisor were that things were more than professional." Diana looked at Calvin. He looked back at her. Zoe looked up at both of them with the patience of someone who already knew the answer to a question adults were taking a long time to get to. "A rumor," Calvin said. "That's all it was?" the reporter asked. "No," Diana said. She said it clearly without qualification, the way she said things when she had decided. "That's not all it was?" The reporter looked between them. She looked at the little girl in the orange jacket. She looked at the bridge. She looked back at the two of them, and whatever she saw there, she understood it well enough to put her notebook away and just nod. Zoe tugged Calvin's hand. "Can we go find the food trucks now?" "Yeah," he said. "We can go find the food trucks." They walked together off the bridge, the 3 of them, onto the riverbank, where the city had set up the celebration, and the bridge stood behind them over the river, solid and certain, and doing exactly what it had been built to do. Some things take years to build. Some things, when you finally build them right, hold weight you never knew they could carry. And some things, once they are standing, stand for a very long time. The bridge held, and so did they.